you're not able to hear me, confirmation that others can, so you may want to check your audio settings for Zoom.
Hi, Sis. I'm hearing you well.
Thanks so much. Welcome. We're starting up in just a few moments. I have started the training. At least the recording. Cool. All right, so let's begin. Follow along with me. I'll be going at a probably very even pace with my ability. Some folks may have their microphone on their laptop. And we might be getting some feedback. Occasionally what I'm going to do is just make it a little easier for folks to hear, is to mute everybody, just so we have a limited background noise, but feel free to unmute yourself. So if you have a question, probably the easiest thing to do, as you'll see, is to put it in chat. I'll be occasionally stopping, check in group chat. You can put it here to end. Okay, I've resumed here and we have now gone into my course player. So that we're all oriented the same way. Under my dashboard, my courses, click on start course or resume course for July 30th, August 1st, and quarter 4 fundamentals. Excellent. We had some requirements to this course. What we're going to refer to as our course player. Course content will be delivered here in the course player. You'll have access to this course player based off your enrollment date for 2 months. So if there's something you want to come back to or a lab that you'd like to do, you have 2 months in this course player. Everybody should be under details and downloads. The course player has a course tile that will tell us the percent completed. Over here. Oh, we'll spotlight. A percent completed. Also in the course player on the right-hand side, this is the table of contents on the left-hand side. We have our course content item. You'll notice it says bring your own laptop and software requirements. I'm just going to point out to the right-hand side, advanced icon. Click on this, you'll go full screen for the content. As you're looking at bring your own laptops and so forth, there's a requirement. Completely optional. You need some type of text editor. Time, if you want to use an SQL editor, back there's full. We also have DB Visualizer. PDF reader is completely optional. Most browsers will support PDF now. If you're not able to hear me, you probably have some setting configuration in Zoom. You need to go into Zoom, make a change for your audio. It's under the first icon in Zoom, typically some type of dial-in or like there's a drop-down. You're going to want to make sure that you're setting your computer audio. Just hear me. Yeah. Typically, there's some type of issue with your configuration. You may have to change your settings and actually log in and log out again. The screen, you have confirmation that people hear me. Okay. So I'll just point out also in the course player down below is a next button. Right? And this next button refers to moving to the next content item in the course player. So watch here as I click next. You'll see that there's a check mark next to bring your own laptop and software requirement. We have some folks saying that they can't hear us. It'd be great to know if you can hear me. So some folks are saying they can hear me. That's great. Perfect. Okay. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to dial on. So I'm going to do separate connection from what I have on my screen. My internet connection is 1 gigabit per second upload and download. Fiber optics, so we shouldn't have any problems on my side with the internet. All right. So here, our first lab. This was a lab that you're asked to do on your own. It's called the Multimedia Lab. It's called your Verify SSH Access Lab. You may have tried earlier today. There may have been a problem with your access because our tenant was down. It's all back up. It's been upgraded to the latest or most recent version, Incorta, available 4.4.1. We'll have a couple of these labs that you'll do as your homework assignment. So this is a nice introduction. If you haven't done this already, in your course player, details and downloads, after bring your own laptop and software requirements, click on Verify SSH Access, and then click Start. This multimedia lab right here, you'll notice that there's an orange line that's going to go across the top of the page in terms of verify. Oh, this might be the wrong lab. Let me see. Let's make sure we have the right lab. So, if we're going to need, yeah, so here, let's do this. Let's skip this one, this Verify SSH Access, because I don't know at this point in time if we're going to have this set up. Let me go back to everything first. My apologies. So if you were taking a look here at your SSH access, that's fine. I'll show you how to do that in a moment, but I'm still trying to internally get the resources that were required to do that lab. So just bear with me for this moment. We'll leave it empty. We'll actually just use the course player to go to verify access to the Incorta training instance. There's some chat here. I'm going to pause here. Everything here, if you're looking for a toll-free number or the like, you'll see this here under virtual meeting details. Just skip to this item. All the numbers are provided by Zoom. I know there's not perfect coverage worldwide, right? But you can see here this list here. Find your local number. I'll share that link. It's in your virtual meeting details and downloads. Thank you, everybody. And take a look at it. Okay. All there in the course player. So let's take a look here at verify access to the Incorta training instance. We'll come back to verify SSH access. But verify access to the Incorta training instance. Let's start here. This again is a multimedia lab. Press start. If you haven't done this already. And the first thing that we'll want to do here is, the first thing that we'll want to do here is click on this link, training.incorta. Yeah, this link here. And here are the tenant details that you're going to use. You can even copy and paste if you want. Absolutely. I'm going to use an incognito browser window to do that. The name of this tenant here is called Verify. And according to your lab, you'll need to enter in your student as the username and Incorta as the password. And all we're doing in this lab is verifying our ability to log into this instance of Incorta that's being hosted for us, training at IncortaOps.com. You should be able to verify that you see this scatter plot. Once you've completed that lab, you can log out. Click the verified Click Me button, and it will tell us here that you're done with this lab. This is important. You're going to have to do labs as own in this course as homework. We have about, I would say, three and a half hour sessions together. So that's about 10 and a half hours. We will be taking a bio break, at least one, for about 10 minutes in the middle of each training session. Sometimes we might break it up into 5 minutes. So about 10 hours total of time with me in this virtual training, but the labs you'll have to do on your own. So it's good to get familiar, make sure that you have access to training.incortaop.com. So we're going to click next to move on to the next section, our module. Right? Now, what happens is when we click next, right, it marks things off as complete. Here it says virtual meeting details. Virtual meeting details. As I mentioned, we'll come back to this Verify SSH. I'm still seeing how many folks are registered for this course and if we're going to build our own cluster environments in Incorta. But internally, we have some limitations based off of that. So whether or not we can get that together or not is part of our challenge here at Incorta. But that said, we're going to just hold off on this Verify SSH access step right now. In the meantime, I'll just point out here your virtual meeting details, right? A lot of us have already found this, right? It was put in our emails, our self-enrollment emails. So tomorrow's information is here, as well as our third and final session information is here. There's separate links, separate meeting IDs. As I mentioned, we're doing our housekeeping items. I'll be updating content in the course player and releasing new content. So I'll be asking you to refresh your course player occasionally. And when I mean by refresh your course player, I mean reload the page. So let's do that now, actually. So just simply reload the course player. Reload this page in your browser. Some browsers, that's Control-R. That can refresh the course page. You'll notice that I've hidden the Verify SSH access. That's fine. And I've actually added some new content items here. One in particular is named Student User Account and Tenant. I'd like everybody to do at this point in time is to click this link, Student User Account and Tenant. I'll pause to see if there are any questions in chat. I know we had a lot of folks. And yeah, hey, is the meeting being recorded? Yes. And just as I release the content here, you'll see that I'll have the recording of this training added to our details and download. Typically, will take about an hour or two after the conclusion conclusion of this training for us to be notified by Zoom that the recording is been processed and that is available for download. As soon as I receive that notification, I'll add that to details and downloads. I'll review where it is tomorrow. Print it out. Okay. Yeah. So under student user account and tenant, right? We have two links here. The first is this Google Sheet. So let's see if this works for me. Awesome. Well, I'm seeing we have a lot of folks in this training. I don't know if some people are doubled up. That's okay. So we're going to see who signs up here at least first, and then I'll see what I can do adding additional user accounts. But do take a moment here to put your name in column C. Your name in column C. Yeah, in column C, just put your name. For example, I am in the last row here, S30 listed as. But just to take a moment, I'm going to pause while folks have a chance to put their name down. Everybody has to do this if you're going to access our training environment. Excellent. Yeah, please go to the sheet, Google Sheet. If you're not able to do that, yeah, if you don't have access, for those who can't access the Google Sheet, just hang on a moment. We'll still get you lined up. Can't access Google Sheet. Let me know. Your name. Yeah, and we'll get this sorted. We're just going through the housekeeping items here as we begin. Everybody has to get a student account. Just choose a row. Yeah, if you're showing some type of invalid coupon, we may have just hit the limit. Typically, we don't have more than 30 people in these virtual trainings. I'm showing over 50 participants on it. So you may want to partner with somebody, or colleague in your organization. If you have a question, you can send in a question to training at Incorta.com. All right, so I'm just going to take a moment here to see some of the folks here who are entering their names who haven't been able to add here. Yeah, if you're adding, don't add anything. Let's kind of see where we're at. So don't go past this 30 line yet. Can help it. Don't go past where I am. Don't just take a moment. See how many users we actually have to create. So I think we have Manish, Madan. You might want to put, if you can put your name above me, that would be great. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And I'm just collecting a bunch of names of folks here. And I'm just seeing who added or not added, and we'll add some more student accounts. Not a big deal. So just a moment here. Thanks everybody for your patience. Yeah. Yep, just a moment. Well, sure, we have enough accounts for everybody. Yeah, it looks like some people aren't able to access the Google Sheet. It's pretty common, right? Based off of security restrictions in their organization, their enterprise. So I have a couple of folks here who are saying they weren't able themselves. So I'm going to go through that list. And if you posted your name in chat, adding you right now. Thanks everybody for your patience. Really appreciate it. Try not to overwrite somebody else's name on an existing row. Don't worry if you have that access. Yeah. And I'm just adding folks who weren't able to access. I want to make sure we have these user accounts. Yeah. Yeah, so just a moment. All right, so I add a couple more here. Everybody heated, so to speak. People. Thanks everyone for your patience. I really appreciate it as I'm adding folks who weren't able to access a lot of. So only add your name here if you weren't able to access the Google Sheet. Because otherwise, I'm not going to be able to dedupe this list. So if you're able to access this sheet, and I put your name here in this list, please delete it. What I've asked is for people to add their names who can't access the Google Sheet. You see it on my screen. I'll resume my sharing so that, yeah, so I'm adding different users. So if you can't access this Google Sheet, please let me know. Yeah, and if you see your name twice, then delete your name one time. Thank you, everybody. I know this is a little bit of a challenge because we're not all in the same room. We can all access, many people can do this all at once. So for example, I see Walid here, so I'm asking a lot. If you're within Incorta from Egypt, you probably should be able to access this Google Sheet. So you're posting. Yeah. So I've accessed everything after S30. So what we have here, everything I have for Dash. We're just going to have to take a few moments here over enrollment, of course, a little bit longer than I wanted. has nothing to do with licensing. This is just for this training, so that you have access to your training instance. There's a question about licensing beyond this course. Okay, 49, 50, 51. So if you're after S30, starting with S31 to S52, if your name appears above or before S30, please let me know and remove yourself between the group of S31 through S50. I know this is just taking a moment or two, but I really do appreciate it. Accommodating everyone. I want to make sure everybody has access to the training materials for this virtual training. Awesome. Yeah, it's just going to take a moment as we add everybody. So, yeah, thank you. If your name appears above and you want to remove it, if your name doesn't appear in this list, you can't access the Google Sheet, please let me know. Like somebody's saying they repeated themselves. So S29 and S40. Yeah, so only add your name to the list in the group chat if you're not able to access the Google Sheet. So that when I got lost there, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, and we'll have folks not being able to access a couple of things. Cool. It's all right. All right. So it looks like we have a good amount. Behind the scenes, I have to go in and make sure. I'm going to miss a lot of people. Okay, you all back. Hey, 9. All right. Okay, so take a look here. If you're still adding yourself to this list, there wasn't a space before, right? So Hisham, you might want to add yourself. Somebody added you. We have S22, S24 open. Those okay, thanks, everybody. All right, so these are going to be your student account. This is going to be your tenant. I'll add this here. So basically, if choose an empty spot that exists above, don't keep going. Don't add your name down here. Add it somewhere above, please. Thank you. There's space here for S22 and S24. Only one for S44. Yeah, please follow the instructions to your best of the ability so that we can continue with the course. Yeah. Okay, so back in our course player, if we take a look here, if we go back to the course player, there's another link, and this link says, please use the following link to access the student tenant. We're going to do that in just a moment. And we're going to find out who can actually view something and who can't. So follow this link here, training.incorta.op. July 30th is our tenant and our login. And what you're going to do, based off of your spreadsheet, see here, you're going to find your name. And then column B is your student username. And typically, this may not be the case for these users. So, but typically, your password is gonna be W. And it may not be W for some folks here. Okay. And if that's the case, you can't log in, let me know. Right, column F. So for example, as you'll see here, my username, my name is Seth 30, and my password is going to be W. Now I may receive a challenge that tells me to reset my password. I'll do that here. I'll enter W and I'll click sign in. It says you want to enter a new password. There's no easy way for me to reset your password, even though I'm an administrator, right? So the suggestion is, as it says, your new password, just make it your username. But my current password was W, and make my new password my username. Some people will be able to log in with the W password. That's fine. Don't worry about it. But then you know your password's W. You know what your password is. It's either one of this or this, right? Column D or column E for your row. All that matters. Yeah. My current password is W. I'll just change it to S30. There are two benefits of this. One is if you need me to look at something, right? I know what your password is, so I can jump in as your user account. But if you make it something that's your own, that's fine. I just don't know what your password is, so I won't be able to necessarily. Yeah. This is just some of our housekeeping items. We're going to jump into the course content. We have a lot of folks joining us for this virtual training, which is fine. It's just going to be a little bit slow as we start up, but then we'll get going. Just in first gear at the moment. Thanks everybody for your patience. So if you see this screen, right, I'll pause occasionally to look at the chat. Now you should, if you don't have access to the course player, if somebody's invited you and is asking you to go through the materials and you don't have access to the course player, right, you probably shouldn't be in the course. Send an email to training@incorta.com. And the reason why I say that is because we have restrictions on the number of folks who can participate in this course. So if you weren't able to enroll, somebody shared with you the virtual training link, right? And you're not in the course, I'll be going through and yeah, so some folks found two dashboards and some folks, right, as I'm taking a port here, and some folks, right, have just seeing this, uh-oh, this folder's empty. So if you are seeing, uh-oh, this folder's empty, if you're seeing here, and I'll make a message here, if you are seeing, uh-oh, this folder's empty, please comment with Google Sheet for your row. So what I mean by that is I'm seeing, uh-oh, the folder's empty. Right here in column F, we can just put that in there. Folder's empty. And please let me know. Some of you are going to see that. Others of you are going to see a couple of dashboards, which is fine. Yeah, some of you may not be able to access. Just take a moment and let me know in the Google Sheet. Thank you. That will help me identify the students. I have some access configuration for their account. We'll just take a moment. So I'll see how many folks. I see some folks who are adding it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I'm one of the folks who doesn't have access. That's why I'm showing this screen, just so anybody else has that on, let me know. If you're not able to access the Google Sheet, you're one of those users with above S30, please let me know. And we'll add you. Do that in chat. Yep. I'll try to resolve those issues as quickly as I can. Okay, thank you, everybody. And I'm adding some here. So you may want to refresh your screen and let me know if you have some. Cool, so we have some folks here, S37, S39. You might want to refresh again. What you can do is log out. The top right-hand corner, there's a profile icon. You simply sign out. And you can sign back in. See if you mentioned if you didn't have access, see if you have access. We'll give that a shot. So I'll give myself access, or you simply can refresh your environment. And you should see here. Refresh, and you should see now sales demo, sales dash. Cool. So I think there are a couple of folks down here. If you didn't have access, the S50. So we'll take a look here. I'll add that. A couple more. Thanks everybody for your patience here. Cool. Okay. So most of the folks, I think here in the 50s should be good. There we go. Okay, so I'm seeing a couple of names down here. Some folks here, Hashem. Here we have some blank spots. I'm going to move some of the folks who are bottom of this list. I'm going to add you up here, for example, S44 for Ashraf Salama. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. My apologies. And then we have Magni Abul Hassan. You'll be S48. And then Mustafa Abbas. And I put him up here where somebody put in yes. So I don't know who that is, but you're going to be S22. So Mustafa Abbas, you're S22. Thank you. Yeah, try not to overwrite somebody else's name. Yeah, thank you. Otherwise, because if I see a blank, I'm just going to fill it in. So we don't have that. So Hashem, I'm making you here S24. S24. That's right. Okay, perfect. That's a lot of folks. So all right. So if you don't have access to the link, you may not have access to the course player. And if you don't have access to the course player, you probably weren't able to enroll in the course. and we have limits on the course, number of students that we can support on our tenant. So that's by design. So you might want to work with a colleague then who does have access. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so we've selected here in access to our student user account and tenant. There's a lot of housekeeping for us. We have a lot of folks in this training, which is fine. I want to bring to your attention here another place to ask questions on your student sheet if you have access or if you're a colleague. It's okay if you don't have access, that's fine, but answers. Some people, if you do have access, you can ask this question. Otherwise, in chat, you can ask the question, and we'll put it over here. I'll occasionally stop and put some of the questions here. Typically, we get about 50 to, 100 questions in these virtual trainings. So feel free to ask a question here or also in the chat. Yeah, if you're asking for a link or some type of enrollment link, those have already been sent out to the managers who are sharing that, our folks, your organization. So I'm not in control of sending those links. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to mark this off as next. I'm going to share also a little bit later on some student downloads for you as we're going through and working within Incorta. But the way we're going to run, at least today and at the beginning of tomorrow, is that we're actually going to do a guided walkthrough of the Incorta architecture. And this is going to be an opportunity for us to just dive into Incorta from the perspective of an administrator or a developer. And when I say developer, what I really mean is it's a very loose term. But what I mean from that is somebody who's either a data engineer, pipeline engineer, a data engineer, someone who's wrangling with data, perhaps an ETL developer, extract, transform, load developer, or it could be a BI developer, somebody who's a business intelligence tools developer, right? So it's really all of those categories of titles that follows under our umbrella of what we're referring to as a developer, right? Many of those folks might be also traditional database developers or data warehouse developers, right? Those types of titles in their enterprise or organization. Administrators typically fall under the umbrella of folks who are either system administrators who manage databases or are full-time database administrators and data warehouse administrators. Okay, so let's move on to our guided walkthrough of the Incorta architecture. I'm going to go here under details of downloads in our course player architectural fundamentals and select guided walkthrough of the Incorta architecture. And that is looking a little small. So let's refresh our screen, reload our course player, and our diagram should be a lot bigger. There we go. And we're actually going to focus a lot on this in this diagram and refer to it again and again throughout all three of our sessions so that you fully understand sort of the data loading process or the data pipeline in Incorta. Developers and administrators have a tremendous amount of control over the granularity of how they bring data into the Incorta system. If you scroll down below, you'll see here we have all the topics that I'm able to that we're going to cover in this training. Incorta loader service, data load, Incorta storage, Incorta analytics service, direct data mapping. We're going to talk about all these topics in our training. Yeah. You should be able to sign in to learn.incorta.com in your self-enrollment link. That was shared with you within your organization. and I'll come back here to this named and then appear on this list. Let me know. Let me know if your folders are empty. Okay. So as I'm back here in our course player, right, I'm looking at the guided walkthrough of the Incorta architecture item. If you can't find that item here, you can always search by typing guided or type in architecture. Course player has a nice search function that will allow me to get that in the table of contents. I'm going to make this screen and make this content item full screen. So here are the topics that we're going to cover through this guided tour. This developer course will keep coming back and digging into these topics. Working with Incorta is a very iterative process, especially when we're talking about the schema design and dashboard development. The product really be iterative in that fashion and agile, really support an agile methodology for business intelligence, as usual, and marketplace. So we'll be talking about the architecture essentials, complete Incorta interface, how it works. I'll be giving you terminology for the Incorta interface. We'll be specifically coming back to the data load process, which will be a little bit of a challenge for us in some of our labs loading data. So I'm going to address that with many students. Building dashboards themselves, creating calculations and formulas using various things like filters, prompts, and variables. I'll probably add on to this session variables as well. It's missing from this list. And then we'll have some hands-on exercises. I'll be giving you your first hands-on exercise assignment at the end of this virtual training. Okay, so let's dive right in. So as we begin here in our architecture in this diagram, we have two main services in Incorta that compose the Incorta product. One is called the loader service, and the other is called analytics service. The loader service and analytics service. So I'm going to jump back and go in Shell. So this is my host machine that's running training.incorta.ops, what we see here. This machine is pretty modestly sized. So this machine has about 34 gigs on it being used in memory. I'm using an application called HTOP. And there's about 126 or 128 gigs of RAM on this machine. I have about 32 CPU that are available here. And the reason that I'm showing this to you is so that we can look at some really bare bones sort of way of administration, but at least get some gauge of sort of what the utility is of Incorta on this system. Incorta is, as the services, as we'll take a look here, in terms of the analytics service and loader service. Incorta, as these two different services, is essentially a modern data analytics and data warehousing platform. Now, as a young startup company, almost 6 years old now, right? Incorta is finding its way in the marketplace for data analytics and data warehousing. We've had many different sort of what they call taglines in marketing about what we are. The first hyper-converged data analytics, data warehousing platform, for example, or the no ETL data warehouse. I like to say the no ETL data warehouse that offers no limit analytics, right? But we are an in-memory optimized data warehouse. And we're going to be digging into what that means throughout this training. And HTOP is a nice bare bones way just so we can gauge the activity of the utility on this. So I'm going to grep now for those two service processes that you'll see here. So somebody's asking to make this a bigger screen. Sure, make it bigger. So in this case here, what I'm going to look for is just these two processes. So a grep for is it Incorta node? Sure. So this is just a command in Linux. Most folks are familiar with bash shell commands, so that's good news. But we see here that I'm looking for just Incorta node services, right? And here are the two services are running on this machine. So the first of which is I have a service that has this unique identifier, and I have another service that has this unique identifier, right? One of these services is my loader service, and one of these services is my analytics service. So what does that mean? Well, that means essentially for this machine, this host is running both of those services. So, and we'll see from an administrator's perspective, right, that this offers certainly a challenge because Incorta as an in-memory optimized data warehouse on one hand, and also as a self-service modern data analytics platform, right, requires extra management in these services in terms of memory and CPU utilization. As a pretty young product, Incorta doesn't offer that many guardrails at this point in time for what they typically call in the industry resource governance and workload management. That said, there are some settings that we can put in place that can help us from getting out of memory killed. That's a specific term for Linux administration that has to do with how Linux will kill or put an end to a process that uses too much memory. And some modern Linux systems will allow you to enable that ability of the Linux kernel to kill a process that's consuming too much memory, but that's typically a really bad idea. Like, then you won't be able to SSH into the box if a process is too much memory. So someone's reporting that my voice is not clear. I don't know if that's the case, buddy. If you can't hear me, please let me know. Okay, so here they have these two services. So obviously here, somebody's saying it has a bit of a disturbance. So part of my voice is being transferred over Zoom. So what I'll do it when we take a break, or if it persists, we'll call in again. So here's the pathway home Incorta Analytics. That I have for this installation. And within that path, as you can see, is there's Incorta node and then services. So I'm actually going to go to that path. And here you'll see the two directories for each service. We'll also see here a services index, that file. And this is actually telling me which service is what. So for example, here my analytics service, right, is this unique identifier, and my loader service is other unique identifier. So CAA is going to be my analytics service, my loader service is 75. Okay, so those are the two services that are running on this host. Later on, what I'll probably do is just a demonstration of how you can build out and install Incorta as an Incorta cluster, where we have a service dedicated to a node, which typically runs by itself on a host, or you could have multiple sort of services running on a host. But typically in a cluster environment, it's one-to-one. May be some changes to that, but essentially that will ease sort of the workload management or resource governance in a cluster environment. But we're running it on one host, the loader service and the analytics service. Loader service and the analytics service. So let's see what this means in terms of the loader service as we begin with this guided tour. So first of which, I'm back here in Incorta. You may want to come back in or sign out or sign in, whatever your instance is. And we're going to talk about right away what is the work of the Incorta, the loader service, and then the analytics service. So when we log into this instance of what we call a tenant, which is an organizational construct in Incorta, and we have our username and password, we're accessing what's known as the analytics service web user interface. Analytics service web user interface. That's what's running the analytics service right here, right? That's what's running this login screen or dashboard content and so forth. The loader service in this regard is really not exposed. Doesn't have a web UI that's exposed to us. When I log in here or sign in with my username and password, let's just take a moment to review the web user interface taxonomy in terms of web UI components. So first of which is the navigation bar. The top blue bar that goes across the screen is referred to as the navigation bar. And the navigation bar tab, content scheduler, business schema, data. And there's another tab which you're not seeing. I'll bring over another screen here called security. And this is completely data driven. Security is permission driven by the Incorta UI. So for example, previously I was not part of the students group. We're going to talk about what these groups are in just a moment. So I'll select delete. So if I refresh my screen here, you'll notice that the navigation bar, right, has lost its tabs for my user S30. I just see content and scheduler. So the navigation bar, and pretty much actually all the objects within the Incorta UI are security driven. Somebody's asking if this is a kind of a Hadoop architecture. Well, cluster topologies that are distributed systems, sort of. It's just one configuration. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Okay, so this is security driven as we're going back to back. So as I'm going over here and taking a look, I'm going to add myself back to this user group called students. So how security is applied to the web user interface, right? I mentioned here students, is typically through what we call role-based access control, right? Or we have various roles, and essentially groups can be assigned to roles. So you can see some of these privileges as you refer back here. We'll refresh our screen in our navigation bar. I have content, scheduler, business schema, and data now. And all of those permissions that give me access to these various tabs in the navigation bar, you can take a look at here in your profile. So on the right-hand side of your navigation bar is your profile menu. So just click that icon along with me if you can. And this will open up the profile menu. And in the profile menu, select your username. You can also sign out here, but select your name and it has your email. And this will open up the profile drawer. The profile drawer consists of subtabs here that we see. So for example, here you'll see that you belong to the students group. That's the group that you have access to. So the role-based permissions in Incorta are assigned to a group. The security tab lets you change your password. So if you want to change it to your username or back to W. So I'll just take a moment here to highlight security. We'll be looking at security in more detail in this course, most likely in our third session. So you can see here for this group called the students group, there are a variety of users that we have. That's what we signed up as. There's also these various roles that belong to the student group. And this really aligns with those tabs that you see at the top of the screen. Okay. So I'm going to split my screens here. I'll see the administrator version, and then you can see the student version up above. So the first of which, for the student group that we're taking a look at, you'll see that folks here have these various roles. One, this group has these various roles: analyze user, individual analyzer, and schema manager. These are predetermined roles in Incorta. At this point in time, right, these are the roles that have been defined. There is the ability for an administrator to add a new role, but these are out of the box. So for example, you'll see for this analyze user, there are two defined permissions. One is essentially here saying, hey, you can manage the catalog or you can view the schema. Now this word catalog, I look here from the student's perspective, I don't see the word catalog, right? But I do see schema, right? Catalog, for better or worse, in this version of Incorta, what we're referring to is the title of the page, which says catalog. The tab says content. So in that regard, catalog and content, they're basically synonyms, right? That's what the reference is here. So schema means I can click on schema and view items in schema. As I scroll down here, you can see individual analyzer has the same type of permission. Then there's also schema manager. You notice the schema manager has the ability to manage schemas. And that ability says manage means basically if you have ownership over it, you can delete a schema, you can share a schema. For example, those are the type of permissions I'm talking about. Same thing with the catalog. You can share an item that's in the catalog or delete it or the like, right? Here you can see only view access would mean that you can just view an item in the schema, but you wouldn't be able to do something else. Notice here schema manager has data, right? Manage data. So that refers to this tab here, the data tab, that I could actually manage data, whatever I have ownership will be given to me as the edit permissions. So the reason why I show that and share that with you as we begin is just so that you're aware that everything that's in the Incorta web user interface, which is being run by the analytics service, right, is security driven. And this theme of being security first, every object having a security permission around it, really critical, especially when you're dealing with enterprise data or critical data in your organization. That you know from an administrator's perspective or a developer's perspective that there's at least object level permissions that are associated with it. Okay, so there's a scheduler tab, business schema tab, schema, data tab. We're going to come back to these Thanks, everybody. We'll be coming back to these throughout this training. As I'm just going to click here, Content tab, back again here in the navigation bar. The bar or horizontal bar below the Content tab is what we refer to in this case as the action bar. The action bar, and typically because there's some type of action that's associated with it. So there's an Add New menu here on the right side of the action bar that you'll often see. Right, so where you can add a folder, add a dashboard, import a folder, or dashboard. These are a variety of options that are set here in this menu. But it will be different, for example, under the schema tab, right? The Add New menu will say, hey, create a schema, schema wizard, or import schema. So there are different options based off the navigation bar tab and the action bar for you to select, as you'll see. Below the action bar, you'll see is what was referred to as the context bar. This is the third or the tertiary bar that's listed here. This context bar sometimes will have a search menu in it, as we can see here. Sometimes the action bar will have a search menu, or you've caught us in sort of a segue to a new user interface using a new JavaScript library. So there's a migration between that. So some of the UI consistencies, right, are a little bit different or thematically different, and that enforces some of the navigation. So I'll point that out to you as it comes through the course. But essentially, you'll find that search, and search is a really big feature in Incorta. Sometimes it will be here in the action bar. Sometimes it will be in this context bar. So, in this case, on the content page, or what's referred to sometimes as the catalog, search is here in the context bar. So for example, if I type in sales, you'll see that immediately dynamically pops up. I'm typing in what are the dashboards referred to as sales dashboard. And then on the right-hand side is a toggle here in the context bar, a button that allows me to look at my dashboard view, folders or dashboard as either a list or a card view. Now, I'm in list view here, and we have two dashboards. I'm going to click on the first one called Sales Executive Dashboard. You can follow along with this with me. And let's start here. We're going to see basically it's an error. Sales Executive Dashboard. So this dashboard is showing something to us. It's very specific for Incorta. Database administrators or database warehouse administrators might be familiar with some of this terminology. I'll just share that in chat. And what this message is saying, IO error while reading snapshot data, is very specific to Incorta's architecture. So right now, we've been logged in to the analytics service, and we've realized as we're going through the web UI, or at least as I've been showing to you, that the analytics service, right, is a web application that is that basically is showing a variety of objects. Everything is wrapped around a security layer. Now, when we see this error here, IO error while reading snapshot data, what that is referring to is that the analytics service that's trying to visualize, and here's we have the Incorta visualization, it's trying to visualize something that's referred to in Incorta as a direct data map. That's our in-memory direct data map engine, right? And the analytics service is basically trying to look at data for this dashboard that's supposed to be in memory, right? And that's Incorta essentially as an in-memory data warehouse. And that error is referring to the absence of essentially that loading of the data into the analytics service. And that term snapshot is very specific, right, to the world of databases and data warehouses, right? So typically, we're in a traditional database or data warehouse, when you're restarting a database server or instance, right, what happens is a snapshot file is played back into that service and then a transaction log. And a snapshot file is basically, in those traditional worlds of databases and data warehouses, is traditionally a formalized, a serialized form of inserts, right? Insert statements into the most current DDL, right? So a transaction log might have things like deletes or updates or truncates or something in the world of databases, right? But the snapshot eliminates all those and says, hey, here's the current DDL, the data definition language of a table, and just give me a serialized form of insert so I can play that back. And then I'll play the transaction log. And that means that service can start up much faster and load the data quicker. And Incorta has a similar sort of form of those type of snapshots for the analytics service. And those snapshot files are representative of Incorta's direct data mapping technology. And we'll see what that means in just a moment. But that direct data mapping technology, which is really serves as an in-memory data warehouse, gets persisted to disk. And in Incorta's world, at least in this version, in shared storage, as a snapshot file. So that's what that error is referring to. It says, hey, I don't have these snapshot files. There's no, if they exist, there's no data in them. I can't use them. Hence, that's what we're seeing, this error, IO error, while reading snapshot data. Let me know if you have any questions. So from an administrator or our developer's perspective, how do we resolve this issue, right? What are the steps that are associated with this? Well, the first place we go to has to do with how a snapshot created, and that is, as I jump back here, as I said, we're going to be going through this diagram over and over again. So this is really our introduction through our guided walkthrough, which we'll start in just a moment. Yeah. So how that snapshot file actually persists to disk comes from the fact that a schema has been defined for that structured data in the loader service, and data has been loaded into that schema definition, right? And then Incorta, in turn, has done something in terms of mirroring that source data as what we call Parquet files in Incorta storage, and at the same time has actually generated a direct data map on the loader service that the analytics service can consume from a persisted form, the snapshot file to the disk. So we're going to deconstruct what that error means at this point in time. And so what I'm going to do real quickly is go back to Incorta nodes here. And I'm going to go here to a folder called tenants. Hey, thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, okay. So the CD tenants here, I have a lot of different tenants on this host, but the tenant that we all logged in was called July, right? 30th. There we go. So this is the path. This is the path for my installation home Incorta Analytics. There's a tenants folder, July 30th. Now this tenants folder is typically especially in a cluster environment where we have multiple hosts, it really lives in Incorta storage. So basically a shared mount for shared storage, right, would be available to every host. We'll give a demonstration of that, I think, in our third session. So that's Incorta storage. That's where we'll have that shared mount of data, and your tenants folder typically will live there. Right. In this instance, I only have one host running. It's a beefy machine running both instances, so it's fine to have that in disk that's being backed up. That's my tenants folder, and in that folder, I have a data, Parquet, and snapshots. We'll talk about compact later, but this folder here in particular, these snapshot folders are representative of my direct data map persistent disk. All right, so I'm just going to show quickly what that looks like. Snapshot. Now, we have a ton of snapshot sort of files that are available here. Let me just mute here a little background noise. A snapshot file. So I'm in this directory here, snapshots. Yeah, I'll make it full screen. That's the path, right? The CD snapshots. Let's take a look at what's in here. And I'm actually, let's take a look. I have all these different snapshot files that are representative of all these different sort of schemas that haven't yet been fully exposed. But what I want to just point out to you as I'm scrolling through some of these here, right? This is internal to Incorta. These files represent our direct data map that will get loaded into the analytic service, right? Many of these files, even though they're created here, you'll see, for example, the ones like, we'll just take a look here. Do it this way, make it a little easier to look at. Let's just grab for sales, right? These files are typically, and you can see here, they're really, there's no data in them, right? These are basically empty files. There's a little bit of data that exists. This is internal. These are proprietary format in Incorta, right? These are not exposed or documented. This is how we create our own internal snapshot files that basically represent not only the data that's associated with the schema, but also the indexes that are associated with that schema's data that allows us to have our in-memory data warehouse. So let me jump back here then to our diagram. Our snapshot files exist in tenants. So do some other files called Parquet files, right? And Parquet files are essentially a modern columnar storage format, Apache Parquet. It's a compressed version of source data and the like. We can exist there. So our loader service is responsible for creating these Parquet files as well as our snapshot files, building this direct data map. Then our analytics service will do the work of loading that persisted snapshot files, essentially represented the direct data map that lives in memory, our data warehouse for a given schema, and loading it into the analytics service, right? So when we go back to our sales executive dashboard, as you see here, we just don't know what schema it is because we just don't have the permissions to take a look at what that is. So I'm going to actually log out. We'll take a look in just a moment, but at what this is. I'm going to sign out. You don't have permission to edit that dashboard yet. I do as a user called S0. I'll make that password. So here so you can see I have a lot more content as this user that's been exposed to me. That's fine. And here I have my sales demo dashboard, and we had it here, sales executive dashboard. Now, I see the same error, IO error, reading dashboard data. Oh, maybe I don't have the permissions. Sorry. Let me log out. This user actually is under another user who has permissions for this dashboard, so let me change that. Other user, this admin user. There we go. There we go. Same thing. Sales dashboard. There's my sales executive dashboard. Okay. And what I'm looking for here in this UI is the ability to edit what we call insights on the dashboard. So right now I have the empty insight, empty insight, empty insight, empty insight. I have like 6 insights on the dashboard. So I'm just going to click here on this first one, and we don't have permissions as a user to do that, just to view the dashboard content, to consume it, right? But this user who owns this dashboard actually look in and edit the dashboard. Just edit pen. And this is called our analyzer view in Incorta. It allows us to work with a given schema and to analyze the data. And what we can see here is the same error, IO error, while reading the snapshot data. Now, on the left-hand side is something called the data panel. We'll come back to this UI again, but within this data panel is where I can see the name of my schema. Here is the name of a schema called sales. There's a table called sales, and within it are these various columns that have been defined. So each one of these columns sort of has a 3-part name: schema, table or view, and then the name of the field itself. 3-part. So the reason why I did this is so that we can see what the schema is, right? So let's click all down in the navigation bar on our schema tab. And there's a schema called sales. I'll sign out here, go back in as my S30 user. And I have a schema called here. Well, let's tab together, our guided tour. And let's take a look at the schema called sales. Now notice there's a warning here about the status, and it's showing that there's no data loaded for the schema. So let's just first click on the item, right? Click on the item in the table here, sales. This is going to open up the definition of something called the sales schema. Now this is work that developers or administrators do using the Incorta web UI, but the definition of these things of a schema, as I jump back to my architecture diagram, is here in the loader service. The loader service is doing the work of defining the schema. This schema consists of 4 tables: table products, table customers, table countries, and sales. Right? At least here, and typically we talk about this schema as a physical schema in Incorta. This to differentiate, and we'll see this later on, there's something called a business schema, which might be referred to more as a logical schema in Incorta. Yeah, so there's a good question here as I'm taking a look at chat. Somebody's asking, hey, we need to load the data first to be able to visualize it. And the answer is yes, yeah. So we're starting off with just, hey, that we can't even analyze the data. Somebody has something that's existing because we don't have any data loaded. Right? The loader service hasn't done that work. It hasn't created an in-memory direct data map, and it hasn't persisted that in-memory direct data map to disk, what Incorta refers to as snapshot files, and hence why we're seeing the input-output error while trying to read these snapshot files, because they just haven't been loaded. That's what that error means. That's a very common error for folks who are business users and analysts, right? If they see that error, it's common for them to report that error to you as an administrator or developer. Products, customers, countries, and sales are the 4 tables. We'll see here that these tables are essentially been defined as what's known as files in Incorta, really structured data that's either tab separated or comma separated values, right? CSV or CSV files. You can use other type of separators. It doesn't have to be a comma that can support an Incorta or not, but it's basically essentially structured data files. Now, these files are actually defined here, as you'll see here, and if you follow along with me, you'll see local files, product, CSV, local files, customer, and so forth. These local files get uploaded to Incorta via what we have here. Take a look here in our next tab in the navigation bar called Data. In Data, right below the action bar, there are 2 tabs, Data Sources and Data Files. We're going to look at data sources a little bit later, but for right now, click on Data Files. And here we'll find our customer file, right? And this has been shared serving users, right? But these are just files that have been simply uploaded to Incorta. And that process of uploading data to Incorta in the action bar, right, is very basic, very simple. Just going action bar, select here, add new, and then selecting from your PC or local system, right? Now the terminology here says local files. Let me see if I have something under data sets, right? And essentially here I have under data, or let's do measurements. Let's do something like this, yeah. The Euro debt crisis, sure. And all I would simply do is say, this is a CSV file, comma separated file, space open, and then this very small file as an example, right, has been uploaded and it's been added to my data files repository. Now that file, right, it's uploaded to Incorta into the tenants directory. And as you may recall, I'm in my tenants directory right here for the July 30th tenant. We might have many different tenants here. Yeah. So we'll look at the wizard in just a moment. So just hang in there with me. I just want to show what's happening behind the covers. Yeah, thank you. So here is our data directory, right? And within this, the name of the file I think I did was like or something. Here it is, the P6 Euro debt crisis. It's been uploaded to this data directory along with all these other files that you've seen listed here. We're going to take a look at. So I just have a whole handful. Customers, products, for example, they're all listed here. Data files. So that upload is essentially being uploaded to the tenants directory specifically, and then within the data folder, right? Again, when I do an upload of a data file, by default, it's going to your tenants directory, your tenant and that you've been logged into, and the data folder. So back to the schema tab, that's your sales schema. These files have been uploaded to that data directory already, products, customers, countries, and sales. Now we can explore or take a look here in the context menu, the action bar. You'll notice here that there's search. So I can search for specific columns or just scroll down, but you can see each one of these tables has different columns that are associated with it. But what I'd like you to do at this point in time, if you're following along in our guided tour on schema in our action bar, over on the right-hand side, select diagram. And here we're going to see that we have our sales, products, customers, and countries, but we also have a table listed here that's in a different schema, So as the owner of that schema, I'm going to share that with you from an administrator's perspective in just a moment so that you can see it under the schema tab. So just be aware, you're not seeing this date schema. I'm going to click on schema again. Notice that we don't see the global sales, sales SG. I don't see a date schema because that hasn't been shared with us, but we saw that we were exposed to it. So I'm just actually do that. Is that with you? So just refresh your page under schema. Now you'll see that there's this date schema. All right, I'm going to go back to sales. And in the action bar, select diagram. Right. And what we can infer from is that this date schema here, right, or at least in Incorta, when we define schemas, that we can join schemas, tables between schemas. This is a very powerful feature in Incorta, especially, for example, when dealing with dates, right? I want to analyze data from multiple ERP systems. I have a traditional data warehouse, I have a database, I have Kafka for event messaging, I have flat files coming out of Box. I want to bring all of these into a schema or relate data to these two schemas. You can do that in Incorta, and you certainly can do things like establishing a conforming dimension, such as date, between schemas. And this is just a technique for data modeling in Incorta. Most developers really, really enjoy working with. And really find a lot of reuse and ease of manageability. So we have our product, sales, customers, countries, and then there's this different schema that I just shared with you called date, and within it, a date table. Now in the action bar on the right-hand side, you'll see here a gear icon. This gear icon will open up, if you select it, a settings menu that allows us to look at what we can define as keys in Incorta, and also columns in Incorta. I'm going to turn both of those toggles on. If you want to change the layout from orthogonal to circular, whatever your preference is, that's fine. And this allows me in this view to zoom in, if you can do that with your mouse or your touchpad. And for example, here I can see the various fields that have been defined, the columns that are defined in this products table. Remember, products is just a data file in this schema. The yellow item, so I turn off columns, is a key. We'll look at a key, but essentially that's a unique constraint that will prevent us from having duplicate rows of data in the products table. items that are in gray, columns that we see here that are in gray, are referred to as dimension columns. Dimension columns you could typically think of as adjectives, things that describe the noun. Right? The products being the noun, the entity, and the schema. And then what's in blue, you see here, whether it's accurately been labeled or not, is what we refer to as a measure. Typically, a measure is something that will aggregate or calculate upon in Incorta, right? So you think about traditional data warehousing, right, where we're building a very large fact table, right? You typically have in that fact table measures or pre-aggregations or things that you're going to calculate with foreign key references to dimension tables. And in Incorta, we're not remodeling the data per se in that way, right? But we are describing what should be something to help us from defining that behavior for loading, such as preventing duplicates or specifying an upsert, right? An insert or update command would be based off a key typically, and maybe a date timestamp. And then we describe things that we configure things that are columns that describe the entity. And then in addition to that, we determine things that will be calculated for measures. And these can be changed at any point in time. So they're completely configurable. All right. Also down below, as I sort of zoom out here, I want to just bring to your attention these arrows. We're going to be talking about what these arrows mean, but I'll make this a little easier for us all to see on our screen. But basically, with arrows represent join paths in Incorta, and we can only go the direction of the arrows, right? So I can go from sales to products, I can go from sales to customers to countries, I can go from sales to date, right? We have to use different techniques or modeling techniques in Incorta if we want to go the different direction within an arrow. For example, if I want to go from date to countries, right? Right now, the arrow is not pointing from date to sales, so I wouldn't be able to traverse that direction. Yeah, so there's a really good question here. It says here, I only have 4 tables defined within the context of this schema. The question is, why are we seeing 5? Right. So the date schema has its own table defined date, but we're making a join from one schema to the other. Product, sales, and customers and countries is defined within this schema. Right. This folder date is referring to another schema called date, and within the date schema, the diagram, there's just one table per se called the date table, right? But look at all the other schemas that are joined to it, right? So here is our sales schema that's joined to, right, date. But there's another one called data prep or weekly invoice, version numbers or sales to or the like, right? So this is just powerful modeling techniques where we can have various schemas and schemas can be joined to each other. In this case, date is a schema with a date table that will serve as something known as a conforming dimension, right? We have the same type of dates that we want to use for all our types of calculations across schemas. We do that in Incorta. Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking. So I'm going to go back to my sales schema that we see here. We see our individual tables, products, customers, countries, and sales. Our diagram shows the relationship between those tables, product, sales, customers, and countries, as well as another relationship between sales and the date table, which exists in the date schema. I'll go back to my list view in the action bar. I'm actually going to click on products right here on the files icon. That will actually show me the definition of this table within Incorta, the fields that are coming from it that we've selected, right? And then for each individual column name, definition in terms of key or dimension or measure. You'll see that product ID is defined as a key, product name was defined as a measure, as a dimension. Then here I have something like product weight class is defined as a measure. I don't have the ability to edit this. I can only view the schema. Down below are the representations of these joins, and you can see that we have a specific terminology for our joins: child being joined to a parent. So we refer to this as a child table being joined to a parent table. And one of the things that you might notice here, for example, like countries or country ID, right? Versus here in sales, I have customers and country ID, right? Coming from the customers table in the country ID field being joined to countries table in the country ID field. Typically, what we're going to see here in the child is the foreign key reference, i.e. country ID, and then in the parent table, I'm going to see the primary key being listed here, country ID. Okay. Yeah, we're going to be talking about how we can apply filters or load filters and the like in Incorta in the load process in just a moment. So the schema, as I jump back, the schema definition, right, is happening here in our loader service, even though we're using our web UI to do this. And we'll have an opportunity in just a moment to create a schema from a data source using a schema wizard. So you'll see that more tangibly. But what's missing is right now is the ability to load data. I don't have permissions. None of us have permission to load the data. I really have to go in as a user who can do that. Load the data. So I'm going to switch over to that user right now. And I'll bring that screen up. So here's my owner of this, the sales schema. And this user has the ability to load data. We'll see that here in the action bar, load. Now, there are different ways that we can load data in Incorta, as you see here under Load Now, Full, Incremental, and Staging. There's also a way that we can schedule the loading of data in Incorta. And you have very fine-grained control over the load order in Incorta, meaning which table do you want to load first? Do you want to try to load all tables at the same time? If it is a large table, structured data in Incorta, there's even the ability to how you run and chunk data in an incremental load process and so forth. So there are many options. We're going to be covering a good amount of these options in just a moment. But I want to bring to your attention, at least initially, this full process, right? And show behind the scenes what's happening. Because one of the most important things is that can happen when I do perform a load of the data is we're actually going to mirror the data, right? Even though I've uploaded the data, and I'll show this here, even though I've uploaded the data, right, in these data files, when I perform a load of the data in Incorta, what essentially I'm going to do is build a direct data map, right? Though it's not listed here in the loader service, we're going to build a direct data map. But in order for me to build this direct data map, first what we're going to do is actually create a mirror of those schema-defined files or tables in Incorta storage as Parquet files. Actually, a data load for this tenant, we'll take a look at these directories. Data, has those files that I've uploaded to Incorta, right? Snapshots are what we're going to play, what we're going to use as persist the in-memory direct data map to disk. So the loader service will actually create those snapshot files and then populate those snapshot files with data in its compressed form. And then the analytics service will load those up into its memory. But between what we have, at least in this case, data and our snapshots, Incorta has this intermediary step that it's always going to do for all types of data sources called Parquet. So before I load data, let me show you a preview of this. I have here, I've already loaded it, behind the scenes, my date file, but nobody else has created. I have a bunch of schemas here. So under sales, I don't have any Parquet files. And when I do a loading of the data, what I'm going to do is create, and Incorta is going to create Parquet files, and then it's going to use those Parquet files to basically populate its in-memory direct data map. That's going to put in place and persist that in-memory direct data map to disk. And that leads us, right, as we're going through, and I go back to my UI for this data load, that leads us sort of to the difference between full and staging, full and staging. So the load from staging essentially is saying, use the Parquet files that have already been mirrored from the source systems, and from those Parquet files, populate the direct data map and persist it to disk, and I'll load that. So before we get to that, we'll see that option in just a moment. I'm going to do a full load of the sales schema. Hey, do you want to start loading this? Sure, I do. And this schema doesn't have that. It has maybe 1 million rows in it. It's relatively small. So the first thing as what's happening is we'll see here that Incorta is actually creating files, right, in this directory, these Parquet files. That's the first thing it's doing. It's extracting data from the data folder, extracting those files from the data files, such as sales one and customers and countries, taking those files, and it actually created from that, here we go back here, Parquet, it actually created from those CSV or TSV files, it created these Parquet files. Now, somebody was asking about Hadoop. Hadoop is something very similar, right, when you're doing a yarn job or something, but basically outputs to a directory or HDFS, right, Hadoop file system, like the same or similar part numbers. So that's fine, but these are Parquet files, right? So if I cat this file like countries, if I have a Parquet reader, I'd be able to read these. So what do I have here? Countries, and then part something. I don't, but this is basically what you'll hear. And Parquet is representative of this compressed file, columnar store file format. That compression might be 100x. Really depends. Somebody's asking about the compression ratio. So those configurations are pretty standard in Parquet, right? And it really has to do a lot with the selectivity of the data, or the amount of nulls in the data, or the uniqueness of values in data. Right? Everything that basically a cost-based estimator in a database or data warehouse would use. So for example, if I have an auto incrementing field, right, that basically goes for every row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, a Parquet will use something internally like an integer delta compression, saying that the first row, and it has its internal ways of sorting the data, but it will basically per column their format storage. Basically, we'll say, oh, this first row, great. Your one, the last row is 1,000,010. Right, so is it going to write all those values over and over again? The answer is no. It's going to use something like an integer delta compression that says, okay, at the beginning of this I have 1, and at the end of this I have 1,000,010. All the rows are just going to increment this way. So it's only going to write those 2 values, and minimum and max type index. We don't have control over how that's being run. That's being implemented in Incorta, and we're using the columnar format. But there are different types of compression algorithms in place, LZ4 or something for tax. But if I have a bunch of GUIDs or unique identifiers, right, in a column, there's like very little compression. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, so somebody's asking about limits of data, right? So there are some internal limits for what we can do, and there are differing reports, but in terms of how many values can like be in an index for a given table. So off of top of my head, like I don't know what we have for 4.4, what the increases are for. Maybe that will be in the 4.5 version. But at some point in the level, there was like a 2 billion row index sort of restriction. That may have changed in this version. It's been up. Okay, good question. Thanks for that. So we loaded this data, right? And the first thing that happened is we actually created these Parquet files. So I'm going to go here to this load status. I'm going to click on it. Hard to find this, but it's this date timestamp for the last load. I'm just going to click that. You should be able to see that as well. And here are these 4 tables that are in this schema: sales, product, customers, and countries. Right? Sales, product, customers, and countries that are representative of sort of this data load that we have in place. And we can see here that sales, this extraction phase, it's beginning their load type, right, full. We started this extraction phase, and that's actually where we took the data from the CSV files that were uploaded to the data directory, and we extracted them, and we're essentially putting them into Parquet files. Right? That's really the first stage of this process, or load process, and we call that staging. Right? So there was this other load option where we could load from staging. If these Parquet files exist, you'll see that we won't have an extraction process. We just skip that. Right? Once we extract that data, we build that, essentially populate our direct data map in memory. And that's essentially, we'll build what is known and populate the snapshot files. So I'm just going to show this behind the scenes again on this host, clarify this point. I'll get out of the Parquet directory. And behind the scenes, what happened is back to our snapshot files. And we'll just LSL and grep. Right, so here are, we looked at this before and we just saw a handful of these, but essentially here are all our sales schema. This is our whole sales schema directory that map this disk. Now, Incorta, unlike a traditional database or data warehouse, right, is going to take care of all the indexing for you, right? All the internal table statistics, any type of query optimizer would need to do its cost-based estimate or have some heuristics about so that it could come up with the best query plan. Incorta takes care of all of that, right? And that's what this snapshot file really represents, these ZXC or ZXE or ZXI files, right? They represent this in-memory direct data map that's in memory that's been persisted to disk. And you'll notice like some of these are showing, for example, right, a join path, right, between customers and so forth. So I don't know what happened there. Let me see if I can get this back. Accidentally selected. There we go. So here you can see join between customers or join to this date, right? This date schema and date table or join to products. All of these sort of join paths are also being persisted here within this in-memory direct data map to disk. Okay. And once that's been populated, right, the data's been populated, persisted to disk, right, this is then how we're loading the data into the analytics service. So I'm going to come back over to our diagram here of our architecture, and then we'll take a look. But that's how the data gets loaded into it. It's from this shared storage, the snapshot files essentially represent that direct data map persisted to disk. So if we restarted our analytics service or anything like that, it would load those snapshot files that you just saw that were created by the loader service. Would load the analytics service, would load those into in memory. And if I go back here as my S30 user, right, my load status, if I refresh, you'll see my last load status. We'll see that timestamp too. And we can see that data for the sales schema has been loaded. And that, what does that mean? If we go to our content tab now, and I click on Sales Executive Dashboard, we'll no longer see an error, right? We won't see an IO, can't read this. Yeah, so unique key values, right, for the rows version. We're not, thank you very much, Mohammed. Mohammed is sharing something with everybody about that. We're not on the version. We just talk about released versions. But in a newer version of Incorta, When it gets done, we'll be able to support more unique key values for an index. But that can be a limiting factor. If you have a table that doesn't have a unique key values, right, hasn't defined a key, then you'll be able to have that number of rows, right? There's always a limit in terms of what you're loading, so to speak, into memory. So it can be very much hardware driven, right? But there's certainly some techniques in loading factors for it. But essentially you have here, yeah, we're on 4.4.1, everybody. Yeah, you can look here. That's our most, I think that's GA right now. There's always some a little bit confusion here. Okay, so yeah, we have data. Right? We have data in our dashboard. So we're going to dive in. We're going to take a short break because we started up around 5 a.m. my time. We're about 2 hours into this. So this is a good time for us, and we've got about an hour and a half left. So we're going to take what's known as a bio break. And when we come back from that bio break, we're actually going to load data. So we're going to go through this whole process again so that we can understand it. Loading data into the loader service, and we're going to start building actually a dashboard. So you're going to do this yourself. We're going to be pretty resource constrained on this. I just want to make sure I have enough available resources to deal with the number of students. So it'll be pretty tight. We'll see if we can squeeze everybody in. But with a loader service here. So we're going to take a quick bio break. And then we're going to come back and we're going to continue our guided tour where we're going to actually load the schema from the very beginning using a data source. We're going to build out that schema using something called the Schema Wizard. It's a great way to start. And we're going to actually load data. So we're going to create Parquet files and a snapshot that persists to disk. And it will be loaded into our analytics service. And we'll actually immediately start exploring that data. And through that, we're going to learn more about business views, about security, and sort of better practices, data modeling, where we want to put calculations and formulas, right? So we're going to take a quick bio break. I'm going to put that in the chat here. Taking a bio break is an opportunity for you to get a refreshment or to use the facilities, whatever you need to do. And we'll pause here. I'll put on this. I'll put this on my screen here. All right, let me do this here real quick. Okay. Bio break for 10 minutes. So I have here 6:55 a.m. We'll start up at 7:05 a.m. 10-minute bio break. I'm going to pause the recording. Now, okay, thanks everybody. Quick bio break. Put that as well in chat. Okay, we're going to be starting up again in just a couple of moments. Thank you, everybody. Go back to sharing my screen. Yep. Start up in 1 minute. Okay, excellent, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us again here. We started the recording again while I've unmuted myself. We have a lot of good questions coming in, so essentially I've started a parking lot of the questions that are coming in the chat. Just track of some of these. So, yeah, thank you. And we'll try to answer those as we go throughout today's training in the second half of our guided tour, really beginning the second half. So we're going to begin this guided tour and reintroduce all these concepts that we've talked about. We'll start up in just a moment. Thank you. Okay, so let's begin and continue with our guided tour, right? So we'll logged out. You can log back in. We'll click on the content. Now, the first thing is what we're going to do is we're going to create, or I'm going to create and share with you a data source. So I'd like you to click on here in your navigation bar under data. Select here data, and we saw already before data files. Seen upload their files. That's fine. Data sources. So I'm going to create this data source as a user here, and I'll just make it as the S30 user. I'm going to create this data source. I'm going to go, but you can follow along with me and click Add Plus. Let me ask for some help. So, quick moment. Pause and see if I can help. Yeah, if you signed in with a for example, there's somebody saying, hey, I signed in with an account that's not associated with your organization, i.e. if you're using a Gmail account or the like, change that. You know who you are. Yeah. Okay. And then we can get you logged into learn.incorta.com. Thank you. Yeah, don't use the Gmail account. Use something, if you're with an organization, use that organization's email. That lets us know where you're coming from and the like. Perfect. Okay, so add a new data source. So you'll see here that there are a lot of different options for adding a data source in Incorta, right? Out of the box from Apache Drill, Hive, using a third-party box or Dropbox, working with Cassandra, Essbase, services, software as a service such as Freshservice, or if you have a Google Drive or Legacy or something. So for example, I select Kafka. You'll see here that this dialog is very particular to working with Apache Kafka, which is a modern distributed event messaging platform. That's one way to describe it, where you have topic and basically we consume or establish our consumer group to consume a topic from a Kafka cluster. And we'd identify our list of brokers and so forth, and these variety of different message types and so on that we could define here. I'll select cancel. But lots of different sources. So SQL Server, Teradata, Vertica, HANA, PostgreSQL, Netezza, MySQL, and the like. And you can actually define your own custom data sources. There is an SDK that's available. I think it's now published. I'll make a link for this, docs.incorta.com. But for creating your own connector, so to speak, and how to do that. Let me see if I can connector. There is actually, if you're interested, I'll put this in chat. Connector API. So there's a way that you can even create your own connector, your own custom connector in Incorta. I shared in chat with you our docs.incorta.com site, which is a recent addition, in the welcome edition. But essentially, under developer tools, if you wanted to create your own connector, there is this a connector guide that will allow you to do that. And you would just essentially define the driver class here and whatever passing the parameters via connection string, right? Whatever properties you're defining. So we have lots of customers, partners out there who are building custom connectors, right? And where does that fit in within our architecture as I resume our course here under Architecture Fundamentals Guide Walkthrough? We're essentially saying making a connection as a data source to do database, software as a service, or your custom. All of those will live here in the loader service. Very powerful that we can come and connect to structured data essentially. Could even be MongoDB or some type of schema that you're reading from Avro or the like. In a BI connector, taking that semi-structured data and making it into structured data, and that's possible too. The first step of working with your enterprise data or your organization's data is essentially either you're going to be working with flat files as data files that you're uploading, or we're going to make a data source. So here's an example of us making a data source. So I'm going to actually select here database that we have existing on this host. It's a MySQL database. I'm going to call this data source AdventureWorks. And this is a data source that is here on this host. So let me bring that over. MySQL database. So this is the host that's running trade at Incorta.ops. But essentially, this host here is here's my MySQL database on this host. And the database that I'm going to use is called AdventureWorks. It's highlighted here. So that's what I'm going to make a connection to. And that database has these 30 tables in it. Okay. So that's what I'm doing in this dialog. I'm making a connection to that data source. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to supply my same information, username, password, connection pool settings. I'm not going to change that, but this is just a classic JDBC connection string that you see here, in addition to some other properties that I could specify. But in this case, it's localhost. MySQL by default, you run off of port 3306. And my database name in this case is Adventure. Now, I'm creating that data source. You're not able to, because you don't have that password in place to do that. So I'll add this data source. It's going to get connected. Not a typo. So it's nice that Incorta told me, right, that, hey, it didn't work. So I go add data source. And now it's going to add this new data source. Let's see if it worked. And I said, yep, I was able to add it. You can test the connection. Now, remember, everything in Incorta is basically an object that has object permissions associated with it. So what I can do now that I have this data source in place under actions, excuse me, I can select this data source in the table and open up this dialog for this data source, right? You'll notice here under settings, my configuration settings, there's additional properties I can add to this for the connection string for JDB, but also a sharing tab. I can also now, it's the S30 user is the owner, but now I can share this. I can assign these permissions for the folks that I'm sharing. You can view the data source, so it will show up here under data sources. I can give you the privileges to share it with others within our tenant, as well as the ability to edit that data source, like, for example, change passwords and so forth. Change the database. I'm just going to share this with students. Done. So now if you go to your data tab, you should see TS AdventureWorks. and you'll be able to click and see this dialog. Verify that all students can see. Excellent. Okay, so what I've established here, right, is a data source. I've made a connection, MySQL database, a data source called AdventureWorks. So my next step here is really schema detection. So let's go to the Schema tab in the navigation bar. Now, we have a lot of users, a lot of folks in this training from this list. We're probably at a critical level in terms of resources in doing this. So we're going to see how it goes, so to speak. So bear with me, and we're going to load data in groups to see how well we can manage it. And we may get cut off, and then I may have to resize this host, but that won't happen tomorrow. But just bear with us. We can always share somebody's internal schema, so we'll figure out the best strategy for this. So don't fret. So we'll do it together. So what's going to happen here now in this case under schema, right? In the action bar, I'm going to select Add New, and then create schema. So under schema, go in the action bar, select the Add New, and then the Add New menu here, select yes, create schema, schema wizard, and import schema. We're going to select here schema wizard. Schema wizard is a nice way to work with a complex schema. And to just facilitate sort of the table definitions and any relationships between tables in our structured data. So we're going to enter a name. So the name I want you to use is a naming convention, and I'm going to share this with you where I'm going to tokenize this. It's going to squawk at me a little bit, but student ID, schema. I'm going to put this in chat. And the token is what's in here. I want you to change that student ID, this whole token. Change this to your student username. You know, I changed mine from student ID to S30 AdventureWorks. And the reason we have to do that is because within this tenant, we can only have unique schema names, right? So I can only have one S30 schema AdventureWorks, right? I can't, right? In this case, that's right. Okay. And then we'll select the data source. Our data source in this case is going to be AdventureWorks. And you can enter a description. Now let's click next. Once again, under schema, we went to the action bar, right? We see we're going to use the, in the action menu, the schema wizard, and now we're in the wizard, choose a data source. The data source we're going to choose is DS4. I'll click next. Now, in managed tables, what's going on here? Well, as I mentioned, developers, administrators have very, very fine control over how they're going to mirror data from a source system, and that's something that they're making a connection to within Incorta, as well as has fine control over how data gets loaded into Incorta, into Incorta's metadata storage area, as well as how data gets loaded into memory in Incorta, right? In the analytics service. So lots of different options, but it begins here. So we have a data panel, so to speak, on the left-hand side. So it shows all tables. Within it, you can see the name of that database, AdventureWorks. So just start here by selecting the name. And here we'll see that list of all 30 tables. Address, all the way to vendor contact. We're going to say select all. The last item that we'll see here in the canvas is essentially vendor contact. That's the name of a table. And this is the definition. So I'm going to, over here in the data panel, scroll up to the very top and select address. So these are the tables. I have fine control configuration if I don't want to bring in this table. If I want to only bring a handful of these tables, I can select or unmark these. It's up to me. Are you sure you want to remove these tables? I'm going to say no. So I'm looking at the address table. So let's take a moment here just to look at this address table and what Incorta is doing for us. All right, so it's reading essentially from the source system. It's going to this table, right? So here's this database, right? And if I say something here like describe address, I can type the name correctly. Okay, I have my various fields here, columns, right? Address ID, line 1, city, state, province, row, grid, modified date. That's what I'm seeing here, right? This is Incorta. So Incorta is going out to that source system, right? It's gathering essentially the metadata about that table, the information came about that table that we're requesting. And it's taking a look at it and saying, hey, so address ID is an int, we have a varchar and so forth, and this one is full binary. A full binary, right, that we have in place. We can see those. So we've int, an integer. So Incorta is taking these and storing these as an Incorta type. So let's just take a look here at the various Incorta types. So it's mapping from an SQL data type to Incorta's type, which is essentially behind the scenes, right? Incorta is, as you may have noticed already, is a Java web application, right? So we have date and double and integer and long and string and text and timestamp, and then as a type, right, might be arguable, but null. In the world of databases, right, null is a type of value. In the world of programmatic languages, null can also be sometimes considered a type. Yeah, a reference, right? In Java, that's. And then for each type, we can define, our Incorta is doing this, the wizard for us, how this field functions, right? So this address ID as the Incorta type integer is going to function as a key. And a key is essentially going to establish, right, well, one hand, right, typically for indexing. The other hand, you have as a key for a unique constraint. So if I kept loading data into this table with the same address ID, I'd only have one row, right? I wouldn't have rows. And keys in Incorta can be composite keys, meaning multiple columns can be labeled as a key, and together they'll form a composite key that will implement that unique string. So you see here for address, right? Have various columns being brought in. There's one column in particular that's not being inputted, so to speak, being marked off as null. That's var binary, because we don't have support for that var binary field. So we can look here. From our source system. I'll put a limit on that because there are a lot of these. Limit 10. I'm just executing a query. Maybe I got that backwards. Apologies. There we go. And you can see here's that row grid, right? Here's some example rows from that MySQL data, right? So this row grid is basically this var binary stuff. And in terms of working with structured data, that doesn't help us, right? If Incorta was some type of system that doesn't work with unstructured data like documents or something like that, then we'd have to make that for us. It doesn't make any sense for descriptive analytics or implementing predictive analytics. Yeah, so there's some good questions coming here in place. I'm going to say, just for time's sake, thanks for asking and sharing these. But I'm going to put some of these here in. Oh, thank you. yeah, any limitations specific to, if you added it to the parking lot question, that's great. So, right, typically the limitations have to deal with structured data, right? So when people say hierarchical data, that can mean a lot of different things. XML or JSON, right? I would refer to as semi-structured data. And their definition, but can have in a hierarchical form. So typically the challenge is if that's getting it into structured data form, commonly thought of as like comma separated values or table separated values, right? And yeah, the limitations would basically be based off of when we're talking about that in terms of Incorta type, right? Our support for these types, date, doubles, integer, long, strings, text, and null. Right. So for example, you know, the difference between a double and a decimal cause or a source system with your decimal having a higher degree of percent, right? Yeah, or scale, right? So those things can have an influence. Yeah, hope that helps. I'm going to point out something right here on this address table up above. There's actually a button here besides the next to the leak called Custom SQL. And this is the first place where we can override what Incorta is doing. So I can define for this given table, if I want to change this, like, oh, I don't want to bring in this GUID, or if I want to add a predicate, right? And here's an example, like load no rows where 1 equals 0, right? So this is the condition that would always lead to false, right? Load no data in this definition. But I could certainly say, hey, where the modified date is greater than, right, a certain date, 2007, 30, right? I think it's like that. So you have the ability as a developer at any point in time to influence what the SQL is in terms of that query request for mirroring this table, in this case, this address table in Incorta. What I mean by mirroring is we're going to extract that data, right, and write it as Parquet files in our shared storage or to our disk. Also, you'll notice, like custom SQL, there's the ability here to write a custom SQL table below the data path. So here's an example where I might want to call something my table. I have a view in a source database, or I have like a common table expression or table, something that I know is going to be regularly need to be used. So for example, I can write a statement like this. My date, right? And what we see here is just a basic SQL statement. If I execute this, let me try that again. Ooh, you're being really here. I think you understand. Let me try this as my call. Let me see. Select one. Ooh, maybe it doesn't like my. Try that. There we go. It didn't like me having. This is just our SQL editor. It didn't like that I had a semicolon. So apologies. I'm just familiar with the MySQL client. Limiter is optional. And can be added in a connection string. So now as my column, for example. There we go. So this is the idea where I could have a select statement representative of something like a select something from a view, right, or the like, to create RCT, right, some type of way, like in this case, where I can materialize that table in Incorta in the load or the extraction process, which essentially would take that statement and create a Parquet file for it. Its initial step. All right. So, okay. I'm just going to leave that in. You don't have to do that. The next thing is to here, once we've defined what are the tables are, bring it in. There's a question about this joins. We're just going to click next or to finalize. And here you'll see a checkbox that says create the joins between the selected tables if foreign key relationships are detected. So what's happening here is Incorta is basically going to go in for these tables, right? And for each one of these tables, more or less for the information schema light, but I could do something show, create, table address. This is going to give me the DDL for this table in the MySQL. So for address tables, you can see here it has these foreign key constraints, right, that have been defined to state province and the like, right, and so forth. You can see that as a key here being defined state province ID. So Incorta is going to read these DDL statements for each one of those 30 tables in the MySQL database, right, and it's going to look for those foreign key references, right, here. Right. And in doing so, it's going to create relationships based off of those foreign key references as they're defined within a schema for us. And that's really, really advantageous, right? Because I got a lot of tables and there are a lot of joins, right, between these. So our next step here, if you've been following along, our wizard, click create schema. And now I have my schema created. Once again, what have we done? Well, I established a data source connection. I shared that with everybody in the students group. Then we used the schema wizard to basically create a schema. Now, interestingly, in this version of Incorta, behind the scenes, when we create that schema, let me get back here. Right, July 30th. When we create that schema, let's take a look at what happens. S30, what do I do? S30, and then we call it schema work. And I'll pause for a moment to review chat. Here's my schema. It's my snapshot file. So the relationship between all these tables, actually, Incorta has created this behind the scenes. It actually builds out this sort of snapshot file. It's all ready for us that represents all this. There's no data in these snapshot files, so I would basically still get that IO error that we saw initially from reading the snapshot files, but it's created it based off of what we see here. Just the minute we click finish, it created all that. The relationships, reading all those, here in this diagram. So this is the diagram view of all the tables in this AdventureWorks data source. Right now, there are some of these tables we might have thousands in Incorta, right? You know, whether that this really helps in terms of a view, but you have the ability to search or select one table, such as sales order detail, and see how it relates to other tables. Sales order header or product, right? That's listed. These you saw before. We can go into the action bar under settings, open up the gear icon, open up the settings menu, and you can show your columns with all those, as well as your on any one of these tables will show how it relates to the other table. So Incorta has gone in and has basically said, hey, here are the relationships between this table and your table. For example, I could search for address here in the action bar, there's search. So the address table, I'm just going to select on this address table. And as we saw before in the definition of a table, unlike what it says as a file, we now see SQL. This is basically a table that's defined from SQL. We saw this in the wizard, right? With the custom SQL statement. If I click on SQL, I have a data source dialog that says this is coming from SQL. And now I have this select statement. I have the ability to come in at any point in time and add my predicate here. That's like I can actually make this table in Incorta a multi-source table. So for example, I'll just copy that SQL statement. You don't have to do this. I'm going to do it as an example. I can add a multi-source table. It doesn't have to be another SQL. It could be a flat file. It just has to have the same columns, address ID, line 1, 2, and so forth, right? Kafka topic, whatever it may be. I could add my single data source. I'll say SQL eventually. I could specify a query. Done. And that might be the situation where I have the table, right, but in one database, but it's only for addresses for customers that are from A to, let's say, F. And then everybody from G to N, right, would be on another database server. And then everybody from O to Z would be on the third database server. But in each one of those database servers, it's like a partitioning strategy, right? That's very frequent or common. But I want to bring all those tables with those different addresses together in Incorta. I can do that with a multi-source. So if I select add, you'll see here that I have two sources now. Even though they're the same ones for demonstration purposes, I'll just select done. And then if I look here on the address table again, at least I go on my list view, I'll take a look for address. You'll notice that address has this new icon that says multi. I'll just delete this second one now. But all those joins, the schema wizard, that whole sort of direct data map, the schema wizard has created for me. Right? But you can go in at any point in time for any one of these tables, such as address, right? And you can manually add your own joins or modify existing joins. So if you scroll down on the address, look here, we have our parent joins here and our child joins. So you may remember here our foreign key constraint to state province, right? So address, state, province ID, that was a foreign key definition in the address table, right? And here's the parent table with the primary key, state, province. The court added that join for us. That was a child join. But then we can see here that in certain situations, this table, the address table and the address ID column serves as the parent, right? So sales order header, for example, has two different fields, bill to address ID and ship to address ID. So the foreign key and the address table, of course, has the primary key and the address ID. So besides modifying the SQL, which will determine what we mirror from the source system, right? If I make a change here, say, hey, I put in here where 1 equals 0, we'll basically say to the sources, don't bring in any data or bring in X number of rows that we're going to mirror as Parquet file, okay, initially, and then load into our in-memory data warehouse. But there's another place where you always can specify a load filter down below here called load filter. Right, and this is actually going to determine what gets loaded into the analytics service in memory. Right, so typically that would be something like a modified date. There might be 10 years of addresses here, but I might want to take all that data initially and mirror it in Parquet for storage, but I might only want to load into our analytics service some type of, some type of filter where it'd say, oh, modified date, right? There's a specific syntax for this. You can find it in documentation, but it would be greater than XYZ, right? So I don't have to do that in the SQL. I can mirror the whole source system, but I can also limit the number of records that are being put into Incorta's memory, right, for the data warehouse by specifying a load filter. Okay, so what we're going to do, and we're going to try to do this in a very ordered manner and to see how much we can push our system. So what we're going to perform is a data load, but we're not all going to do it. So I'm going to ask for the first 10 students here from S1 through S1, but only S1 through S10. We might just nuke the whole server and we'll be down. So S1 through 10 students here, S1 through S10, I'm going to ask you to do this within Incorta, but nobody else is S1 through 10. I want to be very clear. If you're not S1, S2, S3, S4, S5, S6, S7, 8, 9, and 10, if you're a different student, please do not load the data. Only S1 through S10 load full data at this point in time. In your action bar, you'll go from load, you'll go to load now, and select full. Only S1 through 10 do that. And what we're going to see behind the scenes as I'm showing HTOP, right, is a lot of activity, right? Well, this host has basically 32 CPUs. Each one of these CPUs is essentially based off of those commands from S1 through S10 is making out and doing a couple of things. It's first going out to that MySQL database and executing for those 30 tables, right, those select statements. Behind the scenes then what it's doing, right, getting that data, it's putting it and storing it into Parquet files. Right? So essentially Parquet files are being created for those individual schemas. So we'll take a look at some of those directories now. So I don't know. I'm not trying to isolate anybody or pick on anybody, but we'll just keep here. I'll go back the directory, Parquet, and then we should have somebody named S1. Let's see. Yep, AdventureWorks. So we'll see, for example, this user S1 has created all these Parquet files as part of their load. That's called the extraction phase of load, right? And then in addition to that, what we would see in snapshots, because we're doing a full load, you can see here, we're going to begin to populate these files. And the biggest tables are sales order header and sales order details. These are the files that we'll see at the most data. That's the load. Now, that was the first group of students that we asked to load data, right? S1 through S10. Let me go back here to my host, my terminal, and we'll see here the activity. Now, in particular, what I'm looking at here is memory consumption. Right? Folks have loaded that. But there's another tool in Incorta for administrators, right, developers to use that understanding of how to manage memory in Incorta, and this is a tool called CMC, the Cluster Management Console. In previous versions of only if you're one of these, right? Only if you fall into this first 10, please everybody else hold off. So if you're somebody else who's not in this list, right? Somebody here is saying that they're not, I am on the list. You should be able to see the data source that we talked about and went through it with the wizard. We're going to go through it again, so just hang on there. Just if you can't load the data, if you weren't able to load the data, right, it's okay. I'm fine. Right. One of the things you just want to make sure, the first thing you want to make sure, as we said before, that you're part of the student group. We want to confirm that. Okay, so and it's fine if you're not able to load the data. Not everyone's going to be able to. So Great. Okay, so let's take a look here for at least those first 10 folks who have done it. What I want to point out here is this tool called the cluster management tool. In the previous versions of Incorta, for whatever reason, it was labeled the central management and administration tool, or the CMC, central management console. But the CMC is an administrator tool, and I'm going to share with you here. You guys don't have access to this in terms of the username or password, but I'll share with you what the tool looks like. Where we have defined here for our given cluster, which is the local host cluster services. And our two services are the analytics service and the loader service. Now, I, as an administrator, need to be very sensitive to, at least in this situation, because of my hardware constraints in terms of memory or CPU. I have to be really aware of what my memory settings are. And so Incorta is a Java app, right? So Java has its own garbage collector and so forth. And we can specify whenever we start a Java program, memory settings for both on-heap and off-heap settings. And Incorta does this as well, as it starts, for example, as a web application, Tomcat process and the like. So we can determine these settings and configure these in the cluster management console, settings for analytics service, loader service. Now, I have here a certain amount of memory that I've dedicated to on-heap memory, right, versus off-heap memory for each one of these services. And if I look at the total amount of memory for analytics service between on-heap and off-heap, right, 4 being the current setting that we're at, with 18 being the on-heap definition, off-heap being 32. 32 plus 8 is 50. Analytics service. Right, my loader service is above that at 58 gigs plus 40. So that 58 plus 50 is about 108 gigs of memory. And you may recall in this case, I only have like 128 gigs of memory. So I'm already really pushing Incorta based off of those settings. Those are my guardrails, but that's really kind of the limit that I have in my case, right? Because I want to give some memory to Linux, obviously, right? And the more memory you have, the less configuration it can be. But that's conservatively would be about 8 gigs, I would say, in this case. So if I have 128 gigs, so now I'm about 120 minus 108, gives me just about 12 gigs. I have a MySQL client running on here, and I also have Spark running as standalone, which is good. So I'm really, really close in terms of my memory settings. I'm really kind of maxed out on Incorta. So I'm going to be watching this closely, and hopefully we'll be able to now load the next amount of folks. I don't know who's drawing on the screen, but maybe that's me. Okay, cool. No, that's just me accidentally. Like the wrong thing. Okay. Yeah, you have to create the schema. So follow along for the next group. If you haven't loaded your data, like your S7, just don't load. The boat has sailed. We're going to share somebody else's schema. I'm not going to I don't think, load everybody's data. So just hold off. We have the next group here that we're going to say to load data. So let me just bring that up. Our next group of folks here. I'm going to say here it's going to be from S11 through S20. So if you're S11, through 20, load. We'll get that a shot. Now, from the CMC perspective, as folks S11 through S20 are loading their data, look. I'll see here if I refresh more and more consumption of my data. In fact, I can click on the loader service, and this version of Incorta gives me memory usage details. So from my loader service, I can get very granular memory usage details. I'll just select that while we're loading data. You can see here I have my July 30th tenant. And I have a lot of different schemas that haven't been exposed to you yet, but you can see here, we have some folks who are loading schemas. So there are some folks who aren't, right, who may have created their schema, but like S36, you weren't supposed to load your data. Right, so when I say I really need folks to listen, so if you decided to load your data, you were like S24, S28, right? You're fine, you created your schema, but we have a couple of folks here decided to load their data. Edit. But we can, anyhow, we can get a drill down. So for example, S20, I mean, here are all the tables, right? And we can actually see the memory consumption for individual tables. So I know from this, there are about 12 million or so rows in this database. It's very modest in size, but we're all loading it. So there are like 50 people who signed up for this course. So the math, we're looking at like adding like over 600 million rows, right? So into Incorta altogether in individual schemas, which is a lot for this host, right? And then up there, so it's going to hit some limits. Not everyone's going to be able to do it. That's why I'm asking people not to do it. But for this, for the sales order header table or the sales order detail table, as we're taking a look at it, the CMC will give it a breakdown of our sales order detail, right? So I can see product ID. This is a pretty large table at 325 megs, so it's over half the size of the database just in one table, which is pretty common. But you can see, for example, this sales order detail ID, how much memory it's using. Right? It's just an integer, right? So that it's using so much memory is indicative that it's actually, right, as a key, as a defined key, like for an index structure, that can be heavier in memory usage. By individual columns that we can. This is in the cluster management console. Have this visibility in. But I'm just going to go back real quick. I know this is taking a little bit of time, but we have a lot of folks here. Thanks everybody for your patience going here. But that's the first part of it. So we're doing okay in terms of our memory usage as people have been loading data. Maybe not everybody had access to it, but I go into HTOP again, quick out. So we're still doing okay in terms of the total memory usage on this host. So what I'm going to say now is for the next group of folks who are still following along with us, I'm going to load data. So the next group here is going to be S21 through S30. Please load your data. Yeah, let's take a look. And so as those folks load the data, we should see things lighting up. I'm going to, since I'm user S30, I'm going to do the load now full. I'll load my data. And you can see right now that it's beginning my process. It should take me about a minute, maybe a minute and 30 seconds, maybe less. Right, I'll see that here. These folks are loading data. Right. Incorta is going out to its data source, executing those SQL queries, in this case against the MySQL AdventureWorks database, one of my tables that I've defined, that the schema wizard defined for me. And then we're loading that data into Incorta. The first process of that is we're making Parquet files, right? We have these empty sort of schema snapshot files, but then we're actually going to load that data into the indirect data map with Incorta and then persist that to disk as a snapshot file for storage. And it's going to become available immediately to our analytics services, but an option we call performance optimized. So we're going up a little bit in memory consumption. That's fine. You see here. But knowing what your activity pattern is, what your data loads are, the frequency of your data loads, how much data that you're trying to consume, if you're doing batch loads or scheduled data load process or incremental loads. Yeah, it's creating a Parquet file from one table for initial load. All right, so most folks, you should be done with your data load process. I'll take a look here. And I've seen here my load status. Right, give me about 45 seconds. Right, you're coming through here. Each table, I'll see here the extracted rows. So each one of these this is referring to, for this given table, right, this Parquet file that's being created. And then we have our loaded statement. So this means basically the creation of our direct data map for this magic sauce in-memory data warehouse, so to speak. All that pointer space, it persisted disk, but it's available and it's being loaded now into the analytics. I'll just check to see how we're doing on our resource usage. And you'll see we're beginning to get up to a point. I'm going to say pretty good, everybody. So far, so good. I shut down a bunch of other tenants. So we might be able to squeeze in here. Million rows if everybody loads. So the next group of folks, if you have access, you have S31 through S40. Why don't you load your data? Yeah, just go ahead and do that. And if you made a mistake and loaded it prior, that's fine. If you want to load again, you can. So some of those users, if you're online, will see you at your data. If you have monitoring tools, most people do for their various nodes, right? Things you always are going to monitor are memory, disk, right? Obviously, in-memory, data warehouse, such as Incorta, right? Direct data map. You got to monitor memory, right? So knowing this, knowing what your workload is, what those activity patterns are, what your schedules are, you know, that's going to really infer how you do your hardware sizing to make sure that you're appropriately sized, right? So especially when you're introducing a new workload or a new data source to Incorta with a new schema, right? Whether you know, those aren't things you just throw into production immediately, right? So you want to have some governance, some policies and standard operating procedure around that, right? Where you go through some type of QA or testing, right? You want to make sure you don't get killed. But there's no point in getting killed. And just overall understanding the capacity of the number of rows that you might have. And tables can be very wide, right? I mean, one table can just be like a key value pair table, 2 columns. Other tables can have, you know, 1,000 columns in them, right? So they can be very wide. So, you know, the number of rows as a count isn't always the guide to actually what's being stored in your data. Okay, so that looks like we've added that group here. Let's take a quick look and again at our stamps and refresh. Just take a look at what's happening here with our loader service. How we're doing. Oh, we still look like we're doing pretty good. Most people are doing loads. We're about 43, 50 gigs, but that's probably eating a lot of this service. So we're going to do one more set of loads here for, I think, the last batch, folks. So I'm on between screens here. I just want to make sure we're doing okay with this batch. So that's going to be S41 through S42. And we have Zishan Ahmed. I'm sorry here, I can add you in. We're able to before. I'm going to make you S, but I have to go in behind the scenes and let me see if I can add it up here with. So we're going to say S41 through S50. Load your data. Yeah, and I'll set you up here. Based on Ahmed. And I'll just make sure you're part of the student group for your user. Apologies. Okay, so it looks like folks are loading their data in that last group. Great. Cool. All right, so if you haven't loaded your data, this is the time to load your data. S53, Zayshan, you've been added to the student group, so you should do that now. You'll have access to the data source. You can use Schema Wizard. Yeah. So password should be this. Yeah. Okay. So for everybody here, let's see how we've done in terms of the total usage, right? If I take a look here at my notes, how much memory is being used, right, for my loader service. And so we've creeped up pretty good. I expect a lot of folks have not loaded their schema for whatever reason. That's okay. We should be more pinned in terms of resource consumption than we are, at least in this case. But our memory consumption is pretty low at only like 10 gigs. So I suspect a lot of folks, and I can just eyeball it here, right? We only have a handful of folks loading their schemas. So if you're joining us a little bit later, you had to drop off the call for like signed in at the beginning, you're watching the video. What I'm going to do, or at least the suggestion is going to be, if you're listening at this point, right, is I'm going to share my schema with you. So you don't have to load your data. So if you haven't loaded your data at this point, you can use my schema, which is S30 schema Adventure Works. And I'm putting that in chat, so you that note, you'll put that in the video. Okay, great. So now that we've loaded our schema, right, and I'm going to share mine here as a user. So going back again to Schema Work Ventures 30, I'll share it with other folks. So sharing is caring. I'm going to share this with students. You can at least view it for right now and then participate from this point on. So if you weren't able to load it, or you didn't follow along, or weren't able to follow along before using the wizard to create our schema, that's fine. You now have access. If you go under schema, you'll have access to my schema, S30 Adventure Works. Now, before we go into exploring our data, which is readily available, actually, let's just do that, and we'll come back to this. In the action bar for your schema, you can use mine if you haven't loaded data into your schema. Go explore data. And this is the analyzer view. So once again, I'm on my schema. If you're following along, if you haven't built out your own, that's okay. You can use mine, S30 Adventure Works. In the action bar, click Explore Data. This is what we call the Analyzer web user interface. I just want to spend a moment describing this. And we'll just go through this and then spend about 5 minutes, the last 5 minutes, talking about your first homework assignment. So here we have S30 Schema Adventure Works. Here are all the tables. This is called the data panel we see here. And the schema that I'm exploring is this S30 Schema Adventure Works. If you loaded your own data, use your own schema for this. But you'll see all the tables have been brought in. All the tables have been brought in, available to us. Now, you have search in the data panel. So for example, you can search for something like line total, and notice it will find line total, the name of the column, and where it exists in a given table. So here I have sales order detail. Here's my line total. In the gutter for this data panel, you'll see there are two icons. One is an eye, one is a plus symbol. The eye, if you click on that, is a preview dialog that gives us information about this column. Here it's coming from S30, Schema Adventure Works, from the sales order detail and line total. So Incorta uses a three-part name to reference a given column or field, right? What I mean by that, it's going to name the schema or business schemas you'll see later, the table or view, and then the column or field. Right? This is a data type, the double, and it's going to function as a measure. And anything that's been described as a measure in a schema in Incorta will always have here in the data panel a dark blue dot. Everything else, is, whether it's a key or dimension, will have a light blue dot next. And here's some sample data, which is a really nice feature that shows, hey, that these are doubles. If you want to remove your search item, just simply either delete it or click here in the search X. So let's look for line total. We'll select line total here. Now, next to the I is also a plus. On the plus side, we'll add this column to one of these trays. There are three trays that we describe here in the Analyzer canvas for this visualization. So the number of trays or the type of trays will change depending on the visualization that's been selected. And by default, the visualization that we see first is always one called column chart. So this column chart has three trays to it: a grouping dimension tray, a coloring dimension tray, and of course, a measure tray. A grouping dimension tray, coloring dimension, and a measure tray. Now, if I click this plus, because this has been marked off as a measure and has a dark circle, now automatically the analyzer will put this column, this field, into the measure tray. Just click plus if you're following along with me. Remember, everybody has access to my schema. So S30 AdventureWorks schema, you can explore the data and follow along. And here you'll see line total. Right here. This is a way to, right? This is a way that I can see what the total sales is, 8.2 billion for this company from this table. It's being aggregated for us. When I add a field to a tray, you'll see that the field or the column here turns into what we call a pill. And a pill you can remove or you can drag and move it between trays or reorder the pill within a tray. You just simply drag and drop any one of these pills. Put it back in my measures tray. Pills have property menus. So if you select here the downward arrow, this will open up the properties menu for this line total column as a measure. And you'll see here within the properties menu, I have tabs. These tabs will change depending on the type of visualization or what their options are. Or, for example, if this is a measure versus some type of dimension. So we have data, format, drill down, advanced. And each one of these tabs basically has a subset of properties. For example, here I have a name property, the aggregation type, scale, running total, or some filter elements or the like. We're going to explore these threads. I move here line total to drag and drop to grouping dimensions, and you can make a measure into a grouping dimension and vice versa. You can make a dimension into a measure. Incorta won't restrict where you can put, at least in this version, where you can put a column into a given tray. Here under line total, you'll notice the difference in the properties menu. Now that line total is a dimension, right? There's just data and drill down. We'll come back to the analyzer in just a moment. So I'm going to select here in my action bar, cancel. So I have my schema S30 AdventureWorks, right? And we were just exploring the data. What I want to just show you very briefly are some of the other load options we'll have some more time to look at this as well as we're going to load data several different times, of course. S30 Adventure. In the action bar under settings, my schema settings, you're going to notice something here under sharing. I've shared it with you. And table load order, your load order. You have the ability to specify when a table gets loaded. They're all the same numbers, so basically you're saying, hey, load these in parallel the best you can. But you certainly could specify your largest tables to go first or your last tables to go first. And sometimes that can have some implications on your performance or what you want to happen with a scheduled load against a source system. I think the granularity of control as well. You also have something here under settings, this checkbox for all these individual tables. You'll notice here called performance optimization. And performance optimization essentially is saying, hey, I'm going to load this data into the analytics service. If I only want to create parquet tables, which I'll do here, and if you've loaded your schema, you can do this along with me. I'm going to unmark all my tables and say save changes, term changes. And essentially what I've done now is told the Incorta if I'm performing a load of my data, only create, or this full load now, only create my parquet files. So I'm just going to do this for me with my S30 schema Adventure Works. And essentially what we're telling Incorta is pull the data from the source system, and while we're pulling the data, just create the parquet files, but let's not load any data into the analytics. We load now, go full. And what's going to happen is Incorta is going to go through and it's going to make those same type of requests or queries. You don't have to do this. But it's only going to create files for me. Right? So here we have our schemas. I'm going to go my parquet file. Right. And my schema is S30 schema or something, right? VentureWorks. So here are all my parquet files, but so I'll just go through one, for example, what is it? Sales order detail, right? And now I'll just ls it. Oh, you can see here from the timestamp, it's a recently created file. So my load status is complete. And take a look real briefly at the difference between the load. Notice here, right, my most recent load of the data, you'll see here, I've extracted all my data. It says it's a full data load, but because I turned performance optimize off, as you can see here for the address, here I've extracted those 19,000 rows, but have I loaded any rows into memory? And the answer is no. I did that for all of my tables, right? So what that means is with performance optimized being off, if I go now to my schema Adventure Work, I go back to explore data. Right here I can see my schema. I'll search for line total again. I'll drag that to the measure tray. Line data. Right. We'll see your line total. Yeah. So a couple of questions as I pause here to look at chat. Is it possible to clean transform the data before exploring and analyzing it? Yeah, we'll be talking about different ways that. I got disconnected due to internet issues. Will I be able to replicate these steps? Yeah. Typically, you'll be able to follow the video and continue on with us. But I would probably say, as a suggestion, please, as my S30 right. So anyhow, as I was demonstrating here as exploring data, because I made that load configuration, right, or I disabled performance optimized, right, I've extracted the data, we created parquet files, but what we haven't done is basically said, hey, let's load this into the analytics service. In place. Now, if I go back to the directory, snapshots, right? What else happened? Here are all my snapshots. Do I have any data? Right. So that setting, turning off performance optimized, I still have my snapshot files, but they're basically been cleared out, right? No data has been persisted to disk. Snapshot hasn't even been, these are just basically data here, right? But I'm not going to get an IO error, right? Like we saw before. So I'll turn this back on, performance optimized, but this gives you very granular control within Incorta, because very often what's going to happen is people will mirror their source system at one point in time, right? And then to get all the data or the amount of data they want, but then they'll define some type of load filter, or they'll also define, for example, on sales order header, you might see here, something called an incremental load, right? Where they're basically going to say, I want to load the data for the past 10 minutes or the past hour into Incorta. I'm going to do it on a scheduled basis, and that's an incremental load. And essentially, with an incremental load, right, what you're specifying is the behavior for an upsert, right? So I could say, hey, I want the maximum value of this ship date or modified date. We need some type of, typically a key, some type of defined key, right, to help us deal with our duplicate records and what you want for the logic for that, as well as some type of timestamp column, right? Which one of these is modified date, date, or due date, or you can choose from the last successful transaction time. And here's our typical query, and then we could also specify your update query, essentially specifying the where clause, right? Of your update query or your result, right? That's a timestamp. You specified in the type of timestamp field, what is it, and so forth. So that's how you can implement an incremental load as well. People typically, as a process, people mirroring their data load and then specify incremental loads. Yeah, we don't support a delete, right? So that's a little more of our ETL or versus ELT sort of process. So typically, if you want to perform what we call a soft delete, we need some type of row that we're able to identify as a retired row, right, from a source. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've had the opportunity to explore the data list, at least initially. I've turned back on performance optimized, but see I can do it for each individual table to the definition. Now that I have, though, my data and everything's been put back and at least created in staging, what's interesting is, though, right, I can actually go in now for my schema that I have from Parquet. I actually can choose this other option. Let's load data now from staging, right? So that's going to basically say, load my data from these Parquet files. I can break it up into that two parts. Like I can do, I just want to pull the data, create the Parquet. Incorta has sort of the outline of our snapshot files, but it will build its direct data map in a moment and then populate that direct data map. But do you want to start loading data from staging? I'm going to say load. And in this case, what's going to happen is I'm not going to extract any data, right, from the load system. I'm just going to build out that direct data map from the Parquet files, persist that direct data map to disk, right? And you can see that was very fast, right? So if I do the same grep here, you'll see now I have data, right? My snapshot files, right? You can see the size of the sales order detail and so forth and created. And that data is now available in memory in the analytics service. So if I search for line total, you'll see here my line total. So in that case, that granular control is we said, okay, in this data load, we're going to create our snapshots from the Parquet files from our staging area, right? Well, persist that basically create that direct data map, persist it as a snapshot file in shared storage, and we're going to load this into the analytics service, right? Readily available. So in my load for this data, if I cancel out here, go back to my last load, you'll see my last load, there's no extraction. Load type of staging. I don't extract from the source system. Right? All I'm doing is from the existing Parquet files, right? Building my direct data map, persisting it to snapshot files to disk, and that's being loaded, as you can see here, the load column into memory. Okay? That's because I turned performance optimized to on again. That's right. Before, I turned performance optimized to off, and that really just forced just this extraction of data, but no data was allowed to be loaded into memory. Yeah, very good. Okay, so in terms of our guided tour, we've covered that load process, and we'll come back to it in more detail a little bit later on as well, especially with incremental and some other additional settings that are in place. Maybe you have a chance to look at the load filter and the like. I'm going to go back. Oh, somebody shared their schema. Cool. You want to share your schema with others? Awesome. So in our schema adventure works, I'm going to go back here again to explore data in the action bar, and you can follow along. And let's take a look at our sort of first visualization. So line total column chart is my default. If I want to change my visualization to something else, I certainly can do that. In the action bar, you'll notice here I have an icon that's like a scatter plot or a bubble chart icon. But this will open up a choose a visualization dialog, and we have tables, charts, data fields, and gauges. So just a handful of visualizations. The strong suite with Incorta, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow, right, really isn't in visualizations. You can, ours are pretty standard. Some might say basic or intermediate level. They're not really like a Tableau or Looker. That's fine. But you can use these third-party tools like Power BI and MicroStrategy and Tableau. Those tools you can still use within Incorta, and Incorta really working as a in-memory data warehouse for you. But what we find with many customers is, they're always folks who are very beholden to their tools, loyal to their tools, and like using Power BI. But what we find is that they start off in that strong stance. But over time, what they realize is what's more important is data veracity, right? Data truth in their organization, right? So working with Incorta and analytics, being able to share dashboards, to have these dashboards alerted upon, have dashboards sent to people on a regular basis, it creates a really insight-driven culture in an organization. The ad hoc reporting and so forth from Power BI or MicroStrategy or Tableau or wherever it might be, right? That can continue to exist, but in terms of establishing data veracity and being insight-driven in the organization, people quickly just adopt Incorta because it's so easy to use. Right? Even though it might not have the same visualizations, as long as you have the numbers that you need, right, the key performance indicators, and you can trust that data because you have access to the transactional detail, that's really powerful, right? So even though people start off saying, I have to keep my Power BI, we find that within 6 months, they're not even using Power BI. That said, here are some of the visualizations. So we're going to see this a little bit later on. You're going to have your first homework lab that's actually going to ask you to work with a lot of different visualizations, and we'll review that tomorrow. And actually, let's just stop here then. So I'm going to say cancel. We only have about 5 minutes left, and we still have a lot to go through in our guided tour, but don't worry, don't fret. The most important thing is to get everybody up and running. That's always our first challenge, and especially these large virtual trainings. Is when we have about 50 people or so, is making sure everybody's available to go through and be able to do everything. So I'm going to ask everybody to go back to their course player. Yeah, if you could do that, would be great. So I'm going to go back to my course player. We have our loader service and analytics service here, right? I'm going to collapse this for just a moment. And you'll see here we actually have a lab 4-3 lab United States analysis. Right, so I have to do a couple of things here to put this into place. And this lab is going to be your homework lab. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes reviewing this with you and making sure that you have access to it. So let me just do that. Thank you. So if you'd like to look here at the 4-3 lab, US lab, and now we'll take a look. You spend a couple of minutes reviewing this. This is your homework assignment. You're going to want to try to do this before we, right, before we come back to it. Our next session will be really helpful. And let me make sure, I'm just checking on my other screen, making sure you guys have access to this. Yeah, okay, cool. So the schema in question for this lab that you're going to use, you can see this, is actually going to be, there's two here. I thought I shared this with you. Make sure I have this place. Yeah, okay, cool. So the schema that you're going to be using for this is actually, you're going to be working with something called a schema, but the underlying schema, the data's already been loaded. It's called Schema US Analysis. And just if it's visible to you as a student user. They're basically just two tables, table California cities and table United States. Take a look here at the diagram. And I know that's very North America centric, my apologies. But that's what we have in place here. I think that's your first EMEA virtual training that we had. So hopefully that's not to abilities, but I think you'll get the idea. The focus is mainly working with census data from the United States Census from 2010, essentially. That's a schema that you're going to be using, but it's going to be abstracted to something called a business schema. So your lab is going to be asking that you work with this business schema primarily. You don't need to edit the schema, you just have view of this data. Let me just take a quick look at that. There are two main visualizations, and I just want you to be aware, don't click next, as I mentioned before, until you see the instructions or direct instruction. Click next. Once you're in this multimedia schema, as you click start, you'll see here that this multimedia schema, multimedia lab has its own table of contents to it. So if you get lost or need to see where you want to go, it's like two nested table of contents. You can expand out here, and you can also collapse the table of content at a point in time, open it or collapse. It says here, choose your adventure. And what we mean by that is you are using the training.incortaops.com adventure. This is the one you want to follow, training at Incorta. So just click this button. Don't click the My Incorta. Do the training at Incorta, right? And that's going to tell you what your first thing you do. You're going to create your own dashboard by yourself following these instructions, right? And there's a point here, if you click the wrong thing to go back, you don't go back. You're in the right place. You're at the training at Incorta, as it explains here, right? Sign in and just keep calm and dashboard on, right? So there's an infographic that explains this first one, this lab you want to do, and there's little highlights here, infographics that you can explore. So just like a road number with rounded, very basic dashboard. And here, click the orange buttons to expose the additional content. You'll notice the orange bar going across the top of the line. You scroll down. Remember, follow the training at Incorta, not the My Incorta, the training at Incorta, which is the default naming convention. So you'll name your dashboard, for example, S99 CAA Cities dashboard. Use your student username. Okay? And here are the direct instructions how to add the insight and how to use it. But just follow along to your best of the ability. Let's go through. And then, did you click done? Great. Once you've created that dashboard, you'll create the US dashboard. Notice here we have this downward arrows. Even though it says next, don't click next. So the next thing you're going to do, scroll down. create the US dashboard. This one's a lot more complicated, but it's certainly doable. So you're going to filter the dashboard, you can drill down, running row count, and so forth, right? So here's the infographic. Take some time to look at all these hints on the infographic as you're going through on this dashboard, okay? We'll review this essentially in tomorrow's training, so you have a recording of the review. We're going to talk about many of these things as we continue on with our guided tour. Make sure you go through all the elements in the infographic, all the markers, right? You can just scroll through them, and then once you're done that, you can continue on, and you'll see the direct instruction for this dashboard. I just usually click, there are a lot of them here, I can't always track them all. They jump around, but just click here, these little plus, little arrows here, and that will make sure you get all of them. And you know when you've explored the entire infographic, when the button below turns orange, right? You'll see that. So we continue. And that gives you the step-by-step instructions for creating the dashboard. And remember, name these things as you did before. Here is, for example, S99 United States dashboard. And it will say next here, but the arrow says go down. Don't click till you see the very final bit that says time to click next. You're done with this lab, okay? All right, that's your homework assignment. We're gonna wrap it up. It's 8:30 our time here. I wanted to thank everybody for your time today. I appreciate the opportunity we appreciate the opportunity to deliver here at Incorta our training. You'll find a video posted probably within the next 2 hours. I don't control when that happens, Zoom does. So sometimes it takes like 30 minutes, sometimes it takes like 4 hours. So whenever it becomes available, it'll be posted. You'll see here session 01 video, right, in that link. You have access to your student user account and tenant. For whatever reason you don't have access to that, you can send an email at training@incorta.com and we'll take a look at it for you. But your next virtual meeting details will be listed here. Your homework assignment, I'll put this in chat, is under Architecture Fundamentals. It's the lab US State Analysis. Right, we're doing pretty good on time. But that's your homework assignment. Everybody? Should take you about 45 minutes. Right? Yeah, no worries. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, if you're asking you have to be enrolled in this course to access the course content. So if you were invited from a colleague to the virtual meeting, but you didn't have access to this course player, you have to enroll. So someone has to share with you an enrollment link to this course. I can't share the specific link with you outside of that. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity today. Have a great day. Okay, thanks. We're gonna end the meeting now and I'll stop this recording. And it will be up as soon as it becomes available. Yeah, so if you have someone in your organization with the enrollment link, right, that they shared via email, yeah, take a look.
Sid, I have a question. Can we replicate all? Can we replicate all these steps which you have told using the recording? I got disconnected for an hour, so I'm lost a bit. So can I replicate those steps?
Yeah,
which
so you can. So the video, right? We're going to go through. So when the video becomes available, you can follow the video pretty quickly. And it is searchable, so to speak.
That's
so
what I wanted.
You'll be able to follow.
I just wanted to be ready for the next session, so I just wanted to
make
sure.
So if you want to be ready for the next session, we really haven't done anything except load the data, and you can use my schema. So we're going to continue the guided tour tomorrow. But if you want to jump into it, do the lab, the 4-3 lab United States analysis. There's direct instructions step by step. Do that. That will give you the best preparation.
Got it. Thank you, Seth. Have a nice day.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. Yeah. And I know people.
Seth, Gaurav here. I'm actually unable to log into the training .incortops.com. It's saying a blank. It's showing a blank page.
Yeah, so you're probably not using the right browser.
I'm using Chrome.
Oh, interesting.
So
Yeah.
it's
So if you're just going,
yeah.
So if you're just going, so yeah, just okay. So that's the first step. So I think I understand what you're asking. So there's in our lab, verify access to the Incorta training instance. It was also listed here under student tenants. So you want to use this login here. Training at IncortaOp.com 8080. Support
Yep,
that we expose.
I'm using this link.
Yeah, so that's the link that you're using. So if you're not able to access that, I'm not sure what I can do for you. That might be a restriction on your side, or some people have, they need to whitelist their IP. So if you're able to switch to your own private internet, you probably will be able to do that.
Actually, it's my private internet and I'm using from my own laptop, but the link is working, it is opening, but the user ID credentials, it's not taking. I'm S13, user ID S13.
S13?
Yep, it's showing me a blank page. I can show you. I can do a
Oh, that's
screenshot.
interesting. No, it's okay. Let me just check. Thank you. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So when people say blank page, it can mean a lot of different things. So we can see sign in. I'm able to sign in as S30.
I'm unable to do it. I don't know. It's W, right? It's small W. I'm using it, but it's showing blank page for me.
Yeah, that's a hard one for me to figure out. Right here, you're in the right tenant, right? July 30th.
Yes.
You put an S13, and if you say W, you should be able to say sign in, and you should see it going to a catalog page. So you might want to try. Have you tried doing this as incognito?
Yes, I tried doing incognito as well.
Yeah, I imagine it's some type of browser setting. The other thing you could try is Firefox.
Sure, I'll try that then.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't know what you're configuring. If you're able to get to the landing page, you should be able to log in from a different user. I can confirm that your S13 user account works. Right?
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. So I mean that's half the battle. So outside of some other type of configuration settings, sometimes like if they're proxy settings or the like, I can take a look. But yeah, I apologize about that. I just don't know what a lot of different